How to Pick a Mate. The Guide to a Happy Marriage. By Dr. Clifford R. Adams. Chapter 1. Why Marry, Anyhow? Mating is as old as Eve. In fact, it is the oldest and most popular custom ever devised by mankind. Even in the most isolated tribes that explorers have uncovered on this globe, adult males pair up with females to live together as man and wife. In many areas of the world, it is true, marriages are still arranged by the elders, often at a neat financial profit to the bride's parents. Freedom of choice in mating is a newfangled idea. And in Madagascar, the groom is warned at the wedding that he can beat the bride all he pleases, but if he breaks any bones or gouges any eyes, she has a perfect right to go home to mother. Yet even their mating is popular. Though marriage is the most universal institution known to man, increasing numbers of Americans are shunning it by divorce or otherwise. About 10% of our marriageable men have become unbudgeable bachelors. The number of women who are choosing careers to marriage is soaring. Moreover, there are 1,500,000 men and women in America who tried marriage and are now living apart in divorce. Many others were divorced, then remarried. Thus, why marry, anyhow, is today a fair question. So let's face right at the start the main reasons why people do not marry, or stay married. Many people do not marry because they don't relish the idea of giving up their freedom, their independence. Some men do not like the idea of being saddled with family responsibilities and being tied down to one woman. Likewise, some women have become so accustomed to living alone, and are so reluctant to give up careers, that they hesitate to give up their independence, until it is too late. Many other girls and men do not marry because they are too particular. Often they have a fantasy ideal of the mate they want and can't find such an interested party in real life. Girls, for example, often sigh that they want a man tall, dark and handsome, and graying at the temples. Without realizing it, at least a quarter of all girls yearn for a man who looks like their own father. And a quarter of the men pick someone who looks vaguely like their own mother. There are still other people who don't marry because they lack a decent opportunity. Girls who choose nursing as a career, for example, cut their marriage prospects at least 50%. It is much the same for librarians and social workers. In fact, a girl can reduce her chances of marriage merely by going to a girls' college. Then there is a large group who do not marry because they have been disappointed in love. Perhaps an early love affair ended in disappointment or grief. It produced a psychological scar that prevented the person from achieving happiness through marriage with anyone else. The death of Anne Rutledge shook Abraham Lincoln so profoundly that though he finally married years later, for appearance's sake, he was a miserable husband. A boy who imagines himself passionately in love and then is jilted by a girl who doesn't even let him down gently may lose faith and crawl into a psychological shell in his relations with other women. One college girl became enamored, during her sophomore year, of a prominent man about campus. She came from a fine Philadelphia family and was an attractive, sincere girl. But she was very naive. This man began rushing her. He took her to parties at his fraternity, took her for several moonlight rides in his roadster, and told her she was the girl he had always dreamed of. Within 3 weeks she had lost her virginity. In a few more weeks he had lost interest and was off to make new conquests, and she came to the sickening realization that he had merely been exploiting her love for physical pleasure. Disillusioned, she had to change colleges to keep from facing her friends. She did not tell this story to the counselors at the Penn State Marriage Counseling Service, Compatibility Clinic, until 2 years later. During those 2 years she had been so crushed and full of bitterness that she had not let another man touch or even kiss her. Occasionally men and women do not marry because they have family responsibilities, perhaps a widowed mother or younger orphaned brothers and sisters, which make them feel they can't afford, or have no right, to take on a mate. Still others have physical handicaps. There are some handicaps, of course, that are severe enough to be a real handicap, like the loss of both arms, but more often the handicaps are not serious in themselves. They are serious because the possessor magnifies them in his mind and begins feeling inadequate and inferior. The same applies to a person who thinks he is ugly. Irregular facial features in themselves are never a serious handicap if their possessor has self-confidence and a pleasant personality. The main reason why people do not marry, however, is that they have an unhealthy attitude which makes it virtually impossible for them to adjust themselves happily to thoughts of marriage. They are full of fears about the obligations that marriage may bring. Some are too selfish or too egocentric to be able to compromise, and in marriage as in any partnership the partners must be able to sacrifice their private desires for the common cause. Marriage is no place for prima donnas. Other poorly adjusted persons are incapable of accepting the many responsibilities that go with marriage. Perhaps their mother or father tied them down so closely as a child that they never had a chance to develop their own feeling of self-sufficiency and independence. There are parents who cannot turn their children loose. They object to dating until the youngsters have become so old that learning to get along with the other sex is difficult. Such children have a fixation for the parents and cannot see another person entering the picture as a possible substitute or replacement. This is called the Oedipus complex, and it is no bogey dreamed up by psychologists. A boy may not marry because he is still jealously in love with his own mother. A girl may not marry because she is in love with her father. This kind of fixation is made more acute when the parent is selfish or lonely and builds a network around the child which makes escape impossible. There are some people who are suspicious or jealous by nature. Their emotional instability usually frightens away prospective mates. Many other people, particularly girls, have an unhealthy attitude toward marriage because they are frightened by the physical intimacies that go with marriage. A 29-year-old wife who had been married 4 years confessed recently that she dreaded the thought of physical intimacy with her husband. She had moved to another room and was in a rebellious mood. This wife unconsciously revealed a clue to her coldness when she related remarks her mother had made to her during girlhood. The mother had talked of her own agonies during the girl's birth and had told how the process had injured her internally. The mother had talked of physical intimacy as one of the burdens a wife has to bear. One night, when the girl had been thus conditioned, a date stopped his car on a side road and tried to caress her. She was terrified. Now, 12 years later and formally married, she was still on guard. The war gave many young people an unhealthy attitude toward marriage. A desire for a last fling impelled many of them to promiscuous behavior that has left them with psychological scars. Some men saw so many loose women near their stations and embarkation ports, and frequently had affairs themselves with such women, that their attitude toward all women was cheapened. Other young people, both male and female, were separated so long from contact with the opposite sex that they developed, or feared they had developed, unnatural feelings toward members of the same sex, or thought they lost the knack of making themselves seem attractive to girls or men, whichever the opposite may be. A good many veterans saw so much of war and its destruction that they became cynical of human life and pessimistic about the future. This put them in an extremely poor mood to think of mating. Yet to millions of other veterans war made marriage seem terribly attractive. After leading a shifting existence where nothing seemed real or permanent, the lasting, unchanging things in life appeared more significant than ever before. Marriage, ideally, is one of the most permanent things in life. It gives a person a chance to sink roots. This brings us to the other side of the picture: why people do marry. There are 30 million married couples in America today, and they didn't get married just because it is the customary thing to do. Marriage must have something to offer. If you doubt it, consider these facts. Married people normally live longer than single people. According to the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company report of 1937, twice as many single men from 30 to 45 die as married men in the same age bracket. For women between 30 and 65, the married women have a 10% advantage over the single women. Twice as many widowers die as do men who remain married. Fewer married people go to jail than single people. Fewer go crazy. Fewer commit suicide. These facts would certainly indicate that married people are happier, better adjusted persons than unmarried persons, despite all the tales about henpecked husbands and browbeaten wives. Then there are some very practical, hard-boiled reasons why it pays to marry. For one thing, it is cheaper for two people to live together than to live separately. It costs only 2/3 as much. By marrying, a man becomes a better employment risk. Married men usually are regarded as more steady, more trustworthy employees than single men. This is logical. Marriage exerts a stabilizing influence on most men. An employer can assume that since a married man has taken on the responsibilities of a family, he is a better risk than a man who has shown no ability to assume responsibilities. Another point is that the married man is less apt to leave a good job than a single man. Furthermore, a married person is regarded more favorably socially than a bachelor or spinster. This is not just a ganging up of spouses against anyone not similarly coupled, though that may be a factor. It's a fact that there is a greater feeling of belongingness to the community for the married person than for the bachelor or spinster. A married man is better able to entertain acquaintances in his own home. And right or wrong, most people feel there is something a bit unnatural about an adult remaining unmarried. Psychiatrists agree that except in exceptional cases, women who live alone will become neurotic and frustrated. Living alone is an abnormal state for a woman. She overcomes this hazard only by accepting her fate realistically and setting out intelligently to find enrichment and satisfaction in life. Married people are less lonely than single people because they have someone with whom to share life's dull as well as exciting moments and to share their problems and hopes and ambitions. Also, married couples who raise families frequently have an insurance against old age, the knowledge that in their growing children there will be someone to take care of them if necessary. Life is also more comfortable if you are married than if single, at least for a man. It provides him with home cooking in his own home and someone to keep his socks in order. A basic argument for marriage is that it offers a logical division of labor. Imagine how much more complicated and inconvenient life would be if men had to do their own cooking and sewing, and women, all women, had to compete with men for a livelihood. Finally, marriage offers a legalized way to achieve sexual satisfaction. Men and women can receive relief from their bodily tensions without the terrible feelings of guilt, anxiety, and remorse that often accompany unmarried love. That's something. Modern psychology recognizes that sexual satisfaction is more than a physiological process of reproducing one's kind. It is a psychologically satisfying activity and releases many nervous tensions as well as tensions brought about by hormonal or glandular needs. Those then are the obvious, practical reasons why marriage is so universally popular. But beyond those are some important but less understood cravings which marriage satisfies. Beyond the desire for sex satisfaction, for example, is the yearning of both men and women to share the love and affection of somebody of the opposite sex, someone who takes a genuine interest in them. This sometimes is called a need for sexually colored companionship. This is why married people don't feel the need to run around to shows and parties the way single people do. They have their own companionship within the family. Mark Twain, in his amusing Extracts from Adam's Diary, showed the bond created by such companionship when he quoted Adam as reminiscing. At first I thought Eve talked too much, but, after all these years I see that I was mistaken about Eve in the beginning. It is better to live outside the garden with her than inside it without her. Wheresoever she is, there is Eden. A desire for mastery on the part of most men and a desire to be led on the part of most women is another psychological motive that is satisfied by marriage. It is the thrill of mastery that causes a youth to careen dangerously down the highway at 80 miles an hour or to ride a horse at a breakneck gallop. There is a desire for pride that is satisfied by saying, "my husband," or "my wife," or "my oldest kid." There is a desire for security, a need both real and psychological, that afflicts all of us. We all like to know that there is someone who will look after us when we are sick, someone to comfort us when we are grieved, someone to help us when we are weary. Women particularly feel this need for security. In fact, some observers who work a great deal in testing the reactions of women to the problems of life say that in women this yearning for security overshadows everything else. Women feel the need for security so much more keenly because, if nothing else, they are the weaker sex. They are more dependent on men for their livelihood. Our returning veterans feel an intense need for another kind of security which marriage can give. After years of uncertainty, shifting, and tearing down of life and property, they desperately want to get a hold on something permanent, and to many of them marriage looks like the very best way to do it. For much the same reasons veterans want to raise families. After so much destruction they want to build, they want to create life, life bearing their own likeness, life that will continue after they are gone. Watching and guiding one's own children while they grow up is one of the greatest pleasures of marriage. A couple who deliberately abstains from having children is a selfish couple. Surveys show they mostly do it out of selfishness, the desire of the wife for a career or dislike for children. These reasons are those we would expect from maladjusted people. Certainly by voluntarily remaining childless they miss one of the greatest chances to achieve a happy marriage. By achieving a happy marriage and having children, many people make up for the frustrations and disappointments they have received from life, their dissatisfaction with their job and their own childhood. Children bring them compensation for their own failures. Finally, marriage enables two people to work together in setting up common goals and, by dreaming, planning, struggling, to achieve those goals. Perhaps the goal is to build a home or take a vacation trip to South America together or to put a son through college. The specific goals are not important. The enrichment comes from the two peoples merging their hopes and efforts toward one mutually desired goal. Getting married is one of the biggest steps a person takes in life. In fact, for most people life boils down to coping with three big problems. Learning to get along with people. Choosing a career and succeeding in it. Picking a mate and living happily thereafter. The three are interdependent. Marriage counselors have noticed the significant fact that the individual who makes friends readily, who likes his work and is successful in it, is also the person who tends to choose an excellent mate for himself and work out with that mate a happy marriage. Chapter 2. Your chances of getting a mate you'll like. First, you might ask, what are your chances of getting a mate of any kind? If you are a man, and are interested, you can be almost 100% certain you will marry. More than 10% of the eligible men today won't marry, but that will largely be due to the fact that they prefer to remain bachelors. If you are a girl, the chances that you will marry are not quite as good. At the start of the war, about 13% of the girls were failing to marry. The prospect now is that for several years after the war about 14 or 15% will fail. It will be a good market for men. Girls in some age brackets will be hit harder than others, and we sympathize with the girls past 25 who feel they were passing the peak of the eligibility curve for marriage while many of the best male prospects were still away in the armed forces. These girls have cause for concern. The surplus of grown women over men, which is something new in our population, has been increased by war casualties. And the number of men who prefer bachelorhood is apt to increase from 10% at present to perhaps 15% because the older a single man becomes, the less he thinks about marriage. This war has created a great many old single men. It is estimated that between 2 million and 5 million of the marriageable women in America today will never marry. Sociologists are already worrying about this lost generation of our women between 20 and 35, with those in their late 20s presumably hit the hardest. You may ask when a girl reaches the peak of her eligibility for marriage. In normal years the peak is between 19 and 21, and the curve declines markedly after the 25th birthday. Here are the chances for men and women to marry by certain ages. The odds for men show that only about 1 in 10 marries before he is 21, 1 in 3 marry at ages 21 to 25, about 3 to 10 marry between 25 and 30, and about 1 in 10 marries between 30 and 35. A factor unfavorable to the older girls, past 25, is that as men become older they tend to marry increasingly younger girls. Normally, for example, a man of 25 will marry a girl of 22, whereas a man of 31 will probably marry a girl of 25. That's why girls in the present 25 to 35 group may be hardest hit by the war. One encouraging possibility, however, is that veterans are looking for more wisdom and maturity in their brides than civilians of the same age usually do. There have been a good many reports of veterans marrying girls 5 and 10 years their senior. Idealistically, the best age for a girl to marry is from 21 to 27, and for a man from 25 to 30. Of all women who do marry, about 56% are married by their 25th birthday, about 84% by their 30th birthday and about 95% by their 35th birthday. After 35 a woman has to get busy if she wants to marry. 35 is when an unmarried woman can no longer consider herself a young maid. The marriage prospects for girls today would not be quite so unfavorable if our men would all seek mates. As it is, with from 10 to 15% preferring to remain single, at least 1 million girls will not have an opportunity to marry. As far as we can gather, the reason behind this masculine perversity is that boys, unlike girls, are not indoctrinated with the idea that marriage should be one of their big goals in life. But why, you may ask, are there more eligible girls than men in America? The imbalance caused by the war is not the only reason. Here are some other reasons for the shortage of males that looms. Men die younger than women. The weaker sex is actually the tougher sex when it comes to reaching a ripe old age. Our male surplus of immigrants has been about used up. Immigration is a form of pioneering and has been considered primarily a task of man. When the flow of immigrants was heavy, it accounted for many thousands of our male surplus. Now the flow has dwindled to a trickle. America is no longer a young nation. And of course, the older our population becomes, the more feminine it becomes for the reasons mentioned above. There are still more boy babies born in America than girl babies, about 105 boys per 100 girls, but because the males die faster, both by natural causes and by accidents, the males slip into the minority now after the age of 25. War affects marriage in very peculiar ways. During the initial phase of World War II, marriages increased at a spectacular rate. This probably was due to the increasing prosperity. Prosperity increases both marriages and divorces, and by the psychological incentives to mate as a result of war. These include not only the impulses to elude the draft, but the yearning of a boy to keep some visible contact with home and the yearning of the girl to have some concrete commitment from a man when so many of them were leaving the community to go to war. By 1942, 1,800,000 marriages took place in the country, the highest number in history. Then the rate started dropping off as men became more scarce, so that by 1944 the number of marriages was only 1,440,000. In 1945 the trend was changing. Judging from events after World War I, the post-war years will see a spurt in marriages that may take the rate to nearly 2 million a year for a couple of years. But that won't change the fact that a good many girls still will not have a chance to marry. But even if you do marry, what are the chances you will get a mate you like? The answer depends a great deal on who you are. We can assure you that such mates will not come automatically. Right now there are at least 1 million married couples who are waiting to get a divorce. Millions of other couples tolerate each other but are not happy by any standards we could apply to them. Many of the unsuccessful matches were war marriages, hastily made. A study made after the First War, of marriages hastily contracted from 1916 to 1920 show that those marriages were less happy for both men and women than those contracted before the war. Another study showed that the marriages undertaken immediately after men came back from World War I were not, on an average, as happy as they would have been normally. The same will be true for many of the hurriedly contracted marriages in 1946 and 1947. These studies substantiate the fact that much greater likelihood of mismating exists when marriages are hastily contracted, and especially when contracted at a time of high emotional excitement. As this book is written, 1 marriage in 5 is ending in divorce, and as we get further into the post-war years the rate will probably rise to at least 1 failure in every 4 marriages. Furthermore, if the long-range trends continue, the divorce rate will be 1 divorce for every 2 marriages by 1975. Hollywood stars, and physicians in some states, are already close to that rate. That's pretty depressing to contemplate, and you consider that 15 years ago the rate was 1 failure in 14 marriages. Perhaps the one encouraging aspect of the growing male shortage is that it may slow down the divorce rate. Divorces occur most frequently when men are plentiful. When men are scarce, women tend to hang on to what they have and need to be provoked before they will fly off to Reno. Why is the divorce rate rising at such an ominous rate? Admittedly, there are deeper reasons than the war for the trend. Civilization, in becoming more complex, puts greater strains and stresses on marriage. Unhappy married couples are not held together as much as they used to be by fears inspired by hell and damnation religion. Our movies and soap operas present marriage in a fantastically unreal light. Finally, it seems that our standards for marriage happiness are now so low that people assume a couple is happy as long as the husband doesn't beat his wife openly. You may be interested to know that all the trends indicate that more divorced men remarry than do divorced women. In spite of the fact that each divorce separates a couple, in 1940 there were twice as many feminine divorcees who had not remarried as there were unmarried male divorces. The records also disclose the interesting fact that only about 10% of the women getting divorces ask alimony, and that only 6% get it. Your chances of getting a mate you will like are even affected by your sex. If you are a girl, your chances are not as good as if you were a man. This is largely due to the fact that a girl cannot gracefully take the initiative in stalking a mate who looks attractive to her. Women enjoy being pursued, but men still don't. They don't want anything that seems too easy to win. If the woman takes the initiative, at least if she takes it conspicuously, the world will think her aggressive and unladylike. She will be thought common, for instance, if she goes to the phone and asks a boy for a date or if she proposes marriage. Despite the progress of feminine emancipation during this century, and especially during World War II, this is still a man's world. And probably feminism will be on the defensive after the war when the veterans return and many of the women will be expected to retire gracefully to the kitchens. At any rate, our present moral standards apparently make it much more difficult for a girl to win some possible mate who interests her than it is for a man. Few of our younger people realize it, but there are also a host of other factors that often limit the number of acceptable mates they are able to choose from. Marriage counselors use the phrase, assortative mating, to describe the way two people of the opposite sex pair up on the basis of being pretty much like each other and living in much the same neighborhood. The term was first used to describe the way animals mate on the basis of similar size and color. Today's men and girls often set up criteria in selecting a mate that narrow their possible choices more than they realize. A man often has some pretty specific ideas on the kind of girl he wants to marry, and the girl has similar ideas about her husband-to-be. The chances of a person getting a mate he will like becomes less and less as he raises his qualifications. In the early days of American life, when civilization was much simpler than it is today, and when people differed less in their social and economic status, a girl or man usually could find among 5 acquaintances someone suitable for marriage. The situation is decidedly different today. One authority in this field estimates that a girl, for example, needs to know 20 or 25 young men in order that she may have sufficient range to find someone eligible for her needs. Let's look at some of the little considered factors that limit your choice. How old must your mate be? Many people who are looking for a mate think it is bad for the bride to be older than the groom. The girl is especially sensitive about this because she feels she may be losing prestige. Actually, such marriages usually turn out to be happier than average because the girl is usually more eager to prove herself a good wife and is less apt to be a clinging vine, but that doesn't change the fact that some people still frown on such marriages. Society also frowns on matches where there is a great difference in age. For example, marriages where the man is 10 years older are viewed with alarm. For reasons not too well understood, marriages in which the husband is from 4 to 7 years older than his bride are less happy than those involving any other age differences. However, if the man is 8 or more years older, no special handicap seems to be involved. Taken as a whole, the happiest, and most socially approved, marriages are those in which the man is 1 to 2 years older. How educated must your mate be? All the studies that have been made of marriage show that as one's educational level rises, an individual tends more and more to make a rational, and less emotional, choice of a mate. The educated man has a greater range of choice than the educated woman, because he is much more willing to marry under his educational level, whereas a woman, again for reasons of prestige, is usually reluctant to do so. If she goes to college, she feels she has no choice but to restrict her selection to college men. By so confining herself and by leading a more cloistered life than her cousin who never went past high school, a college girl definitely reduces her chances of marrying. Whereas in the past nearly 90% of our women have married, it is estimated that only about 75% of college women have married. How much money must your mate have? If you have money yourself or have it in your family, you are more apt to make a hard-headed choice for a mate than one who has little money. He will marry more spontaneously. If you think back, you may remember that during the Depression of 1929 to 33, people of high economic status postponed marrying until more stable times, whereas the people with small incomes went right on marrying, if they could possibly manage it. Generally, people tend to marry pretty much into their own economic class. The girl who was raised in the poor section of town and is now working as a sales clerk in a 5 and 10 store may yearn to marry a sophisticated man from a wealthy family, but that is not the kind of mate she needs. It is doubtful that she could be happy with him because their differences are too great. There are exceptions, of course. Occasionally we all read about, and cheer, a news report of a modern Cinderella, but we usually frown when we read of the opposite, of a rich girl marrying a poor man. That somehow seems abnormal to us. The girl may lose caste. A man of moderate means who himself married a debutante expressed his views on such arrangements, however, when he said to us, "Never marry for money." But it's just as easy to fall in love with a rich girl. How about the mate's national background and religion? Are you an American of Italian extraction who would not consider marrying a girl of Swedish background? Or are you a Catholic who would not think of marrying anyone but another Catholic? You may have good reasons for your exclusiveness, but the fact remains that your field has been narrowed. How is your job affecting your prospects? People tend to marry mates who live conveniently near and who have similar interests. About a fifth of all married couples meet each other at work. A school teacher, for example, is much more likely to know school teachers of the opposite sex than to know physicians of the opposite sex. Yet many occupations are such that far more of one sex enter them than is true of the other. For example, there are normally nearly 5 women teachers to 1 man teacher, 7 or 8 feminine librarians to 1 male librarian, some 25 or 30 women in nursing to each man in somewhat similar work. Is it any wonder that the rate of marriage among school teachers, librarians, and among nurses is much lower than average? Girls who choose nursing for a career cut their marriage prospects by at least 50%. Finally, how is geography affecting your prospects for mates? Though the conditions of World War II broadened the matrimonial horizon of many men and girls as they moved about the country, the fact remains that location is an important factor in confining the choice of millions of people. In a study of several thousand marriages in Philadelphia, it was discovered that 4 out of 5 young people there selected their mates from within their own city. In 1 out of 3 of the marriages, the couple had lived within 5 blocks of each other before marriage. Looking at the country as a whole, some towns and sections offer better marriage prospects than others. This is a little-known fact. For example, the cities of New England offer the poorest possibilities for young women to marry of any section of the country. This is mainly because the textile industries in that area attract so many more women than men. Of the 30 United States cities offering the poorest opportunities for marriage for women, 22 are in New England. And of the 30 offering the best opportunities for women, about half are in Michigan, Ohio, and northern Indiana, where the automotive industries, which attract far more men than women, are located. It is interesting to note that during World War II the marriage rate increased very rapidly in areas with new war industries requiring a great number of men: shipbuilding, aircraft, metalworking. In Baltimore, the marriage rate went up nearly 40%, in Hartford, important in aviation, it went up 25%. Areas that consistently favor girls by providing a surplus of eligible men are the far west and the southwest, particularly Texas. The deep south is much less favorable. Where does your state stand on the ratio of eligible men to eligible women? The typical American male marries at about 25.5 and the typical female at 22.5, or about 3 years earlier. Thus perhaps the fairest comparison would be to take the single men between 23 and 28 and the single women between 20 and 25. The following table shows how each state rates in such a comparison. It is based on the 1940 census. Nevada leads the list as the paradise for girls since there are 177 men there for each 100 girls. At the other end of the scale, Rhode Island is overpopulated with females, due to its many textile mills, and so is an unpromising place for girls to find a mate but a fine place for men. There are 100 girls for every 83 men. Notice that all of the first 9 states offering the best possibilities for girls are in the West, and that the 5 most favorable states for men are in the East. Perhaps the old slogan, "Go West, young man, go West," might be revised to read, "Go East, young man, go West, young woman." There is another age range that needs consideration. That is, the groups who have not married by the time most people marry. These groups are the men between 30 and 35 and girls between 25 and 30. Both these groups need to get busy because they face a very definite possibility of becoming crusty old bachelors or disgruntled spinsters. Since men past 30 tend to marry women who are more than 3 years younger than themselves, it might be valid to compare the number of girls 25 to 30 to the men 30 to 35. Here again the West is the great land of opportunity for girls, while the Carolinas and the New England textile states are still less inviting to girls. One interesting thing is that in the southern states of Kentucky, Virginia and Louisiana a girl's ratio is pretty favorable up to 25 years, but after that they become definitely not good places to find a husband. If we take all single men as a whole and compare them to the single women, without regard to age, here is how the states seem to shape up. The 10 best for women. And poorest for men. The 10 poorest for women. And best for men. Wyoming, Massachusetts. Montana, Rhode Island. Idaho, Connecticut. Washington, New Hampshire. Arizona, New Jersey. California, New York. North Dakota, Pennsylvania. Oregon, Ohio. South Dakota, North Carolina. Nevada, Missouri. Of the 10 best states for women, all are west of the Mississippi, and of the best states for men all but one is east of the Mississippi. While the states themselves are pretty good guides as to where to go to pick a mate, the location within a particular state may be of even greater importance. For example, in Virginia, Norfolk rates as a fine place for a girl to find a husband, but Richmond rates way down the scale. Here is a comparison of the number of white, single girls in the 25 to 30 age group and of the white, single men aged 30 to 35 in our 106 cities having a population of 50,000 or more. In such a comparison, incidentally, virtually all of our cities show a surplus of older girls over older men when those two age groups are compared. Here, however, we are interested only in the relative desirability of cities. The 20 best cities for women and poorest for men. In order, the 20 poorest cities for women and best for men. In order: San Diego, California. Madison, Wisconsin. San Francisco, California. Lincoln, Nebraska. Norfolk, Virginia. Des Moines, Iowa. Miami, Florida. Jackson, Miss. Long Beach, California. Evanston, Illinois. Los Angeles, California. Minneapolis, Minnesota. Phoenix, Arizona. Wichita, Kansas. Oakland, California. St. Paul, Minnesota. Tacoma, Washington. Nashville, Tennessee. Sacramento, California. Winston-Salem, N.C. San Antonio, Texas. Knoxville, Tennessee. Houston, Texas. Grand Rapids, Michigan. Detroit, Michigan. Fort Wayne, Indiana. Baltimore, Maryland. Salt Lake City, Utah. Pueblo, Colorado. New Haven, Connecticut. Peoria, Illinois. Omaha, Nebraska. Mobile, Alabama. Cleveland, Ohio. Trenton, N.J. Springfield, Illinois. Jacksonville, Florida. Montgomery, Alabama. Columbus, Georgia. Hartford, Connecticut. Girls on farms and in small towns may fret to get to the big cities, but their chances of marrying will be better in their rural communities, where there are 104 men for every 100 women, than in the cities where the ratio is 96 men per 100 girls. Women's colleges and all-male colleges may have their advantages educationally, but they can deprive you of the chance for normal contacts with the opposite sex, and thus reduce your chances of marrying. To get a fairly accurate idea of just what your marriage expectancy is, considering all factors, you should take the test reproduced with this chapter on, What is your marriage expectancy? If your expectancy rating is low, do not become pessimistic. That's the worst thing that could happen. Rather decide what you want in a mate, find where such a mate exists, establish friendships that will lead to introductions, make yourself attractive to possible mates by studying their wants and needs and appearing to fill them. This is a formula that will get almost anyone a mate if he or she really wants one. What is your expectancy of marriage? This test should show pretty clearly whether your chances of marrying are good, or not so good. Be honest with yourself. 1. Do you sometimes compliment a person, even though it is not deserved? Yes, no. 2. Do you prefer different or unconventional people? Yes, no. 3. Do you often become involved in heated arguments? Yes, no. 4. Are you a good dancer and a good mixer? Yes, no. 5. Do your parents generally like the people you date? Yes, no. 6. Do your good friends include both men and women of about your own age? Yes, no. 7. Do you take an active part in 2 or more sports such as tennis, swimming, golf or bowling? Yes, no. 8. Do you seem to get about your share of invitations to mixed parties? Yes, no. 9. Do you and your dates frequently spend your evenings with other couples? Yes, no. 10. Have you ever had a chance to become engaged? Yes, no. 11. Do you seem to make a pretty good first impression? Yes, no. 12. Do you weigh between 100 and 140 if a girl and 130 and 180 if a man? Yes, no. 13. Are you generally in good health? Yes, no. 14. Is your home cheerful and open to all of your friends? Yes, no. 15. Have you met at least 20 members of the opposite sex in the past 3 years who seemed like conceivable marriage risks? Yes, no. 16. Do your friends visit you frequently? Yes, no. 17. Do you live in a town or area that seems to have as many young people of the opposite sex as it has of your own? Yes, no. 18. Do you usually get along with the parents of the people you date? Yes, no. 19. Are you under 27 if a girl and under 30 if a man? Yes, no. 20. Do your friends seem to think of you as cheerful and sociable? Yes, no. 21. Do you visit other towns 3 or 4 times a year? Yes, no. 22. When you meet someone you know, do you usually speak first? Yes, no. 23. Do you usually remember names and faces of people you meet? Yes, no. 24. Do you like to entertain a date at home? Yes, no. 25. Are you friendly or affectionate with persons you like? Yes, no. 26. Would you marry a person 3 years younger or older than you are? Yes, no. 27. Do you date fairly often? Yes, no. 28. Are you a good listener? Yes, no. 29. Do you find it easy to talk to strangers? Yes, no. 30. Is your voice pleasing and modulated? Yes, no. 31. Do you frequent places where members of the opposite sex are? Yes, no. 32. Do you like to watch baseball, football, or boxing? Yes, no. 33. Have you gone steady with 2 or more persons? Yes, no. 34. If a girl, do you live west of the Mississippi, or if a man, do you live in the east? Yes, no. The correct answer to the first 3 questions is no, and to all the remaining 31 questions yes. If you answered 25 or more of the questions correctly, then you have a high expectancy rating. If you answered only 8 or less of them correctly, then your chances of marrying are definitely poor unless you take action to improve your eligibility. Chapter 3. Are you ready for married love? The answer to this question is deceptively simple. You are ready if you are old enough. But how old are you? There are several yardsticks besides the calendar for measuring your age. Educators enjoy telling the story of the wise young orphan. When a sweet old lady leaned over and asked him his age, the young man removed his glasses, polished them thoughtfully for a minute, and then replied, "My psychological age, madam, is 12 years, my moral age is 10 years, my social age is 8 years, my anatomical and physiological ages are respectively 6 and 7, but I have not been informed of my chronological age. That, I understand, is a matter of comparative insignificance. When we ask you if you are old enough to marry, we mean mature enough. And maturity, as it bears on your readiness for marriage, can be measured in at least 5 ways: physiological, mental, vocational, sexual, and emotional maturity. By these standards, some people are not old enough to marry when they are 35. How old are you physiologically? The adolescence of the early teens is characterized by rapid bodily growth, growth in height, weight, and sexual development. By 18, however, you are nearly as tall as you will ever be. Sexual growth, while not complete, especially for a girl, has reached a point where reproduction is possible. General growth slows down considerably and by 24 has just about stopped. For purposes of marriage, the average person is mature physiologically by the age of 20. But some require more time, because of glandular disturbances. How old are you mentally? We do not mean what is your IQ, which is a measure of your capacity to learn, but rather the accumulation of your learning. In short, how wise are you? Normally a person must live 21 or 22 years before he has seen enough of life through schooling and practical experience to take on the responsibilities that go with marriage. If you have led a sheltered or one-sided life, it will probably take longer. How old are you vocationally? A man, certainly, is not mature until he has established that he can earn a living. A college degree, a license to practice medicine, to teach, or to practice barbering are not enough. There must be a successful work record, and that cannot be present until a person has used his vocational knowledge to make a living for a period of not less than 1 year. Once it was thought that girls needed no special training vocationally, but that notion is pretty well outdated now. Modern women like to feel independent, and frequently their ability to earn money is called into use. Perhaps the husband is a disabled war veteran, or perhaps the wife feels she needs a career to earn money. At the least, the girl entering marriage should already be capable of managing a home, and that requires skill and knowledge that can't be learned in a nightclub. Since some occupations require many more years of education and training than others, vocational maturity can fall anywhere between 18 and 26, but for most people it doesn't come until about the age of 22. How old are you sexually? Sexual maturity implies far more than the ability to beget or bear a child. Most morons can do this. Sexual maturity is largely determined by childhood, and it is something most people either have or don't have. A youngster who was reared by parents who were well balanced emotionally, who were ready listeners to his problems, who explained comprehensively the magic and mystery of sex functions to him, will usually be ready to face the problems of sexual adolescence. During adolescence he will be subjected to many strains. He will undergo many glandular changes and begin to have sexual, 40, capacity. The reproductive apparatus approaches maturity between the ages of 12 and 14. The boy has emissions. The girl begins to menstruate. Both often are disturbed or even frightened by these new functions, unless the parent has been wise enough to prepare them for the changes. During adolescence they start dating, which at first is done self-consciously and awkwardly. Their state of mind is made more nervous if the parents tease or ridicule these first steps in courting. When the boy and girl emerge from adolescence about the age of 18, they have achieved sexual maturity if all has gone well. If so, there is freedom from repression and inhibitions concerning sex. There is no disgust or aversion as far as sex is concerned. Likewise, there is no abnormal curiosity or longing for sexual information or experience. He or she may still be shy or self-conscious at first when in the presence of someone of the opposite sex, but both soon get over it when they find activities to share. This is normally easy because by 18 youngsters have acquired skill in dancing, card playing, sports, hobbies, and conversing. If by 18 or 20 a person hasn't acquired sexual maturity in the sense described, it might be a good idea to consult a marriage counseling bureau, a college psychoeducational clinic, a psychologist, or some other person trained in helping normal people achieve normal adjustments. How old are you emotionally? This is by far the most significant of all your ages in determining your readiness to marry. Most of the research on marriage indicates that people who lack emotional maturity rarely achieve a happy marriage. What is emotional maturity, you may ask? It's a state of mind that includes ability to get along with people, ability to find satisfaction and reward in work, ability to recognize and solve problems which involve your relations with others, and finally it includes freedom from instability and neuroticism. As in sexual maturity, which is closely related to emotional maturity, the first 10 years of life are apparently the most important in determining if you will be emotionally stable. Certainly by the age of 18 a person should have a pretty firm hold on his emotions. If he has not acquired such balance by 21 or 22, the outlook is not too promising, and he should deliberately set out to achieve better control of himself. A stenographer of 24 came to the Penn State Marriage Counseling Service for advice after she had had a dozen promiscuous affairs with men. She came from a broken home where her parents had taken only an erratic interest in her, and she showed serious signs of emotional instability, as do virtually all promiscuous girls and men. Here is the verbatim report that was written on Sandra. It provides a classic picture of emotional instability. Sandra feels inferior, does many unconventional things, has few standards or ideals. Badly maladjusted, she flits from one boy to another, seeking new thrills. Quite promiscuous and highly sexed, she has had sexual affairs with 12 or 13 men. Somewhat popular while in college, with attractive face and nice figure, she was dated by many boys, none of whom even went with her for more than 4 dates. Easily persuaded to any course of action, she could readily excuse any breach of behavior. Changeable and selfish, but anxious to be known as a campus queen, she openly sought dates and a sort of dubious and short-lived popularity. Because of her instability, total lack of standards, ideals and morals, and her selfishness and shallowness, she is unlikely to marry unless she catches a rich sucker. She is in 6 danger zones on her audit profile. May the Lord help the poor man who is inveigled into marriage. No boy has ever proposed marriage to her, a fact that has hurt her vanity. To pin emotional maturity down more specifically, here side by side are 8 traits, one or more of which are frequently noted in persons who are considered emotionally immature, and 8 noted in mature persons. Immature mature. 1. Is aggressive and domineering. 1. Gets along with people. 2. Is rebellious and bull-headed. 2. Has satisfying home life. 3. Is full of hates and prejudices. 3. Profits from his mistakes. 4. Is often victim of illusions. 4. Is successful in his work. 5. Has many phobias, inhibitions. 5. Respects authority and customs. 6. Is victim of imaginary pains, stuttering, hysteria, tremors, insomnia. 6. He faces his problems. 7. Is high-strung. 7. Accepts responsibility for own acts. 8. Is often indecisive and anxious. 8. He is consistent and predictable. A person can be emotionally unstable and not show all of those symptoms, but he undoubtedly will show some of them. What can anyone do to improve his control over his emotions, and thus achieve greater emotional maturity? Here are a few suggestions. Try to look at yourself objectively. Try to do so especially in connection with your relations with others. Are you reasonable rather than prejudiced? Can you recognize that a man may be a fine person even though he is a Republican or a Democrat, that he is a good person even though he may be a Protestant or a Catholic? Do you honestly try to make decisions on the basis of facts rather than on the basis of feelings, or imaginary facts that are more agreeable to you? Sit down every few weeks and try deliberately to look at yourself as others must see you. Would you like yourself if you were someone else? Learn to laugh at yourself. The person who can laugh at himself, or who can laugh at the things he loves and continue to love them, is the person who is most likely to have insight into himself. And that insight is important in emotional maturity. If you have a sense of the ridiculous, you can see fun in many of your own activities, and in doing so are able to relax and feel happy. You learn to laugh at your troubles, yet at the same time do your best to improve the situation. This ability to see the ridiculous side acts as a cushion and helps you maintain your stability, even when things are most exasperating. Set up a confidential relationship with some other person. Telling your problems to another person helps you define the problem in your own mind, it furnishes relief from the tensions you have built up, and it brings another person's point of view into the picture. One of the biggest single values in marriage is the fact that it provides husband and wife a confidant in each other, and gives them the confidential relationship that is so important to mental integration. Seek work that satisfies you. Nothing will prevent you from getting a hold on your emotions more than being confined every day to work that is disagreeable to you. If you find it is uninteresting or doesn't challenge you or doesn't offer any opportunity as a stepping stone to more challenging work, change jobs. But do it intelligently, because the person who is a frequent job jumper is not a good marriage risk. Recently we talked to a man who is 44 years of age. He had been divorced once, is now unhappily living with a second wife, wants to divorce her and marry a third woman. His job record shows that he has held 39 different jobs in his life. Is it any wonder that he is unlikely to find happiness or stability in life? He does not know what he wants, can't learn from experience, and is pursuing a will-o'-the-wisp. When you have a problem, face it squarely. Define the problem, get all the facts, and line up alternative solutions in case the first course isn't successful. Many people seem incapable of defining their problems. When they are faced with a frustrating situation, they frequently are unable to vary their attack upon it. When a girl can't get her way, she cries. Crying may bring her some reduction of tension, but it does not solve the problem. The emotionally mature person can keep his head, figure out something to do, but the immature person gives up or cries or gets drunk. We have devoted so much more space to your emotional age than to the other 4 ages, physiological, mental, vocational, and sexual, because it is so fundamental to marriage success. If you find after reading this chapter you want to know more about developing your own maturity, you will find further suggestions in the chapters, Getting Along with the Other Sex, Attracting the One You Want, and Crucial Traits for Marriage Happiness. When all the 5 ages are taken into consideration, it would seem that a girl should not consider marriage until she is at least 19 or 20, and the man should not before he is 21 or 22. Those are minimum ages for normal men and girls. Those who develop slower than average in any of the 5 ages should try to wait a year or 2 longer before deciding about marriage. Physiological maturity. Are you 20 years old or older? Yes, no. Are you in general good health? Yes, no. As far as you know, is your glandular balance normal? Yes, no. Mental maturity. Did you finish the 8th grade without repeating more than 1 grade? Yes, no. Do you read the news daily? Yes, no. By age 20, had you completed at least 2 years of college or earned your own living for 2 years? Yes, no. Vocational maturity. Are you prepared by education or experience to make a living in a specific occupation, or in managing a home? Yes, no. Have you attained your 22nd birthday? Yes, no. Do you have a job doing work for which you have prepared? Yes, no. Sexual maturity. Have you been dating at least once a month since age 16? Yes, no. Are your attitudes toward sex free from disgust or aversion? Yes, no. Were your parents easy to talk to about sex? Yes, no. Emotional maturity. Do you get along well with people? Yes, no. Do you trust people and do they trust you? Yes, no. Do you usually do today what is supposed to be done today? Yes, no. Give yourself 1 point for each yes answer. You should have a total score of at least 12 and should have no less than 2 yes answers in each category if you are to be judged old enough to marry. Are you grown up emotionally? More than almost anything else, your rating on emotional maturity reveals your chances of achieving a happy marriage. Here is a more detailed test of your rating on this crucial trait. Answer yes only if you are sure. 1. Can you accept criticism without having your feelings hurt? Yes, no. 2. Are you normally free from jealousy? Yes, no. 3. When you have differences with people, can you usually work out compromises that satisfy you and don't leave hard feelings? Yes, no. 4. Do you behave yourself because it seems the natural thing to do and not because you fear the consequences of misbehaving? Yes, no. 5. Do you think most people are honest, decent and worthwhile? Yes, no. 6. Are you happy most of the time, and free from violent emotional outbursts? Yes, no. 7. Before beginning a new project or making a final decision, do you honestly weigh the arguments for and against it? Yes, no. 8. Can you be away from the place you live for a month without getting homesick? Yes, no. 9. Do you willingly abide by established authority and the customs of your community? Yes, no. 10. Can you make your own personal decisions without depending on friends and relatives to help you make up your mind? Yes, no. 11. Are you free from vague aches, nail biting, flustered stammering? Yes, no. 12. Can you postpone something you want to do now in order to have greater enjoyment later? Yes, no. 13. Are you living zestfully in the present instead of bragging about past deeds? Yes, no. 14. Do you go to sleep easily and normally slumber without nightmares? Yes, no. 15. Do you get along well with your parents, relatives, and close friends? Yes, no. 16. When things go wrong, do you find the cause and correct it instead of blaming others or lamenting your bad breaks? Yes, no. 17. Are you living up to the responsibilities which go along with the privileges given to you? Yes, no. 18. Have you friends among both sexes, some older and some younger than you are? Yes, no. If you honestly answered yes to 14 of these or more, you are more mature emotionally than the average person. If you answered yes to 16 or more, you should have an exceptionally good chance for a happy marriage. Chapter 4. Is it love, or infatuation? Love is unquestionably the most abused word in the English language. People love puppies, or they love ice cream. Women commonly close their letters to acquaintances with the word love, as do all relatives when they write to one another. Boys trying to get a kiss from their girlfriends mumble something about love. That's to make the giving easier for the girl. Then there are different kinds of genuine love. A mother loves her 2-year-old baby just as wholeheartedly as she loves her husband. And she loves her husband now just as much as she did as a girl 8 years ago when she fell in love with him, but the love is different. She was more misty-eyed then. She didn't realize it, but the earlier love was heavily flavored by sexual attraction. Now sex is still present in her regard for her husband, but the bond is primarily a deep feeling of comradeship. And with the baby, of course, true sexual feelings are not involved at all. In all 3 of the cases, however, she had developed a deep concern for the welfare of the loved one, and in all 3 of the cases the loved one had similar feelings of attachment to her. Right here you have the gist of true love, whether parental, conjugal or romantic. Still, it is often difficult to know if your love is the real thing. 2 out of 5 of the girls who come to the Penn State Marriage Counseling Service for advice about their affairs think they are in love but aren't sure. One girl was really confused. She reported that she was terribly in love with 2 different men at the college. One was on the basketball team. The other played in a campus orchestra. She did not know which one she loved the more and wanted to be told which to choose. Tests soon established beyond a doubt that she had the warmest kind of physical feeling for both men. But the tests also showed that she was primarily fascinated by them as catches. She wasn't actually in love with either, and was so informed. She was the victim of double infatuation. How can you tell love from infatuation? Dr. Henry Bowman of Stevens College offers these points of distinction. Infatuation may come suddenly, but love takes time. Infatuation can be based on one or two traits, usually including sex appeal, whereas love is based on many traits. In infatuation the person is in love with love, whereas in love, the person is in love with another person. In infatuation the other person is thought of as a separate entity and employed for self-gratification. In real love there is a feeling of identity with the other person. Infatuation produces feelings of insecurity and wishful thinking, whereas love produces a sense of security. In infatuation you suffer loss of ambition, appetite, etc., whereas in love you work and plan to please the other person. The physical element is much more important in infatuation than in love. Infatuation may change quickly, but love lasts. In general you can be sure that it is really love if it has developed over a period of time rather than if it comes all of a sudden. But, you may ask, how about those couples who are meant for each other, and fell in love at first sight? Both are nice romantic notions, but both have little validity in fact. There is no one person in the world for anyone. We don't expect happily married couples or happily engaged couples to believe that, but all the evidence indicates it is true. There are hundreds, indeed thousands, of people that you could fall in love with and be happily married to. And there are, of course, thousands and perhaps millions of people you would be miserable with as mates. The only sense in which there can be a one and only for you is that there may be only one good prospect within your range of possible acquaintanceship. It is the multitude of good possible mates that sometimes makes it difficult for a girl to choose between two men. It is the multitude of possibilities that produces triangular situations after marriages, and it is this multitude of available mates in America that makes it possible for a girl to find and love a man in her own community rather than to have to go from Maine to California to meet a one and only. As for instantaneous love, a girl has about as much chance of falling in love at first sight as she does of becoming Cinderella. At times couples experience infatuation at first sight, which may or may not later mature into love. And ordinarily the infatuation is based about 80% on sexual attraction. Love at first sight also often occurs when you come across someone who happens to match your fantasy ideal for a mate. If you have always dreamed of a bride with large brown eyes, a turned-up nose and a shapely figure, and you are ripe for mating, you fall for the first girl matching that description. It is a mighty hazardous way to try to pick a mate. Other people think they fall in love at first sight because they are desperately anxious to have someone to hold to, and clutch at the first person who comes along. They suffer from feelings of insecurity. This was particularly true of girls during the war. One girl who came to the Penn State Clinic was rapturous about her coming marriage to an Army lieutenant stationed temporarily at the college. Why did she love him? She was pretty vague about that and seemed to resent the question. What did they have in common in the way of interests and ideals? The only thing she could think of was that they both liked to bowl. It soon developed that what she was in love with was the idea of getting married. She was 27 and nervous about her future. That she was sincerely convinced she was in love with the man was a tribute to her own powers of self-deception. She realized that she should in all decency be in love with the man she was going to marry, and convinced herself that she was. Frequently two people fall so madly in love soon after meeting that they feel they must marry immediately. This tendency is so well known that most marriage counselors rightfully question if a state of true love exists when the two people feel they will die if they don't get married tomorrow or next week. Real love can wait. It can make sacrifices, It is not something that has to be rushed. The more urgent the desire to get married immediately, the greater the likelihood that it is infatuation and that the infatuation may die out as abruptly as it sprang into being. But why, you may ask, is love at first sight so improbable? Why can't you fall in love as easily immediately as you can after weeks of knowing each other? Here we get to the essence of love, which Webster's dictionary defines as desire for, an earnest effort to promote the welfare of, another. Love is not a trap you fall into. It is a state of respect for and comradeship with another that has developed from the fact that you both have similar tastes, ideals, and yearnings. Such comradeship cannot come as a result of one date. Cynics have said that, love is of all feelings the most egoistic and consequently is, when crossed, the least generous. That assumes love is possessive and selfish. Genuine love as we understand it today is the medium through which the fullest development of the personalities of a man and woman may take place. And it involves a keen desire for the welfare of the loved person. There is nothing egoistic about real love. Here briefly are some conditions that are usually present before love can develop. The two persons have had experiences together that have caused each to react favorably to the other. They have each found present in the other qualities, standards and ideals which they admire. Their sexual feelings have been so favorably conditioned, without their realizing it, that they find great pleasure just in being in each other's presence. Each one in some way fulfills some of the motives that are of importance to the other, such as desire for social approval or, with a man, mastery. There are many people for whom it is utterly impossible to fall in love. For a few this is due to physical inadequacy. But to most it is a result of unfavorable conditioning that has made them selfish or afraid of contact with the opposite sex. How does a person get the ability to fall in love? From a physical standpoint, certain hormones pour into the bloodstream of a man or woman past puberty that create sexual tension. But that only starts to explain the complexity of the love relationship. Your ability to fall in love depends for the most part on your own previous experience as far back as childhood. In the beginning, for example, your mother met all your needs. Every time you cried, your mother rushed to you, to feed you, to give you a drink, to change your diaper or to remove a pin that was sticking in you. Gradually in your mind the mother becomes associated with everything pleasant, with eating, the relief of thirst, the elimination of pain. You probably became attached to her with a depth of love and affection that lasted for many years. Similarly, your mother received pleasure from hearing your coos when she gave you relief from pain. She received the approval of your father for bearing you and the admiring comments on you from the neighbors, and she satisfied her motive of mastery by having something, you, under her control. Her love deepened for you. It has been observed in the South, where the nursemaids may often spend more time with the child than the mother does, that the child becomes more favorably conditioned to the nursemaid than to the mother. That illustrates that love is a learned process. As you grew older and began playing with children, you learned to like those with whom playing was fun, and you learned to dislike those where your association was marked only by dissatisfaction and unpleasantness. Similarly, if your early associations with those of the opposite sex were all marked by unpleasantness and nervous tension, you tended to stick to those of your own sex, but if they were marked with pleasure, you turned more and more to the other sex. Even the appearance of the girl that a young man likes is due to pleasant associations with other persons who had one or more of the characteristics that his girl has. It is not just accident that girls are more likely to fall in love with boys who have characteristics resembling their own fathers than they are with boys who don't. Similarly, a boy is more likely to fall in love with a girl who resembles his own mother than with a girl who doesn't. If your early life has been marked by strife in the home and tension in your relation with people your own age, then you have been poorly conditioned for the comradeship married love can provide. And you probably will have the greatest difficulty finding happiness in marriage. But if your relationships with people have been relatively serene, you will find it easy to learn to love someone of the opposite sex. You will find that when you do certain things you receive approval by way of happy smiles and rewards. Gradually you learn to put your best foot forward. You and your date both are conditioned to be on your best behavior, and if you have many things in common, develop a deep friendship with each other. Then, if the conditioning during the friendship is quite favorable, your mutual feeling of appreciation and affection for each other grows and finally ripens into love. There you have it. In your love for each other you will both gradually become sexually vibrant, and you both will begin to feel a need for sexual expression through each other. As this need becomes increasingly strong, you both begin to think of engagement and marriage. Ideally, when your need for each other becomes so strong that it can no longer be denied, you are married. Are you really in love? The first thing many counselors like to find out when people come to them about the possibility of marrying is to find out whether they are actually in love. Here are some questions which quickly disclose whether a person is afflicted with the real thing or is just infatuated by good looks and sex appeal. Answer each question truthfully regardless of what you think the correct answer should be. 1. Do you have a great number of things that you like to do together? Yes, no. 2. Do you have a feeling of pride when you compare your friend to any other you have known? Yes, no. 3. Do you feel you need to apologize for certain things about him? Yes, no. 4. Do you suffer from a feeling of unrest when away from him or her? Yes, no. 5. Have you a strong desire to please him or her, and are you quite glad to give way on your own preferences? Yes, no. 6. Do you have any difficulty carrying on a conversation with each other? Yes, no. 7. Even when you quarrel, do you still enjoy being together? Yes, no. 8. Do you actually want to marry this person? Yes, no. 9. Would you be afraid to trust him or her in the presence of another attractive person of your own sex for an evening? Yes, no. 10. Does he or she have the qualities you would like to have in your children? Yes, no. 11. Do your friends and associates mostly admire this person and think he, or she, would be a good match for you? Yes, no. 12. Do you ever wonder if he, or she, is faithful? Yes, no. 13. Do your parents think you are in love? They are very discerning about such things. Yes, no. 14. Have you started planning, at least in your own mind, what kind of wedding, children, and home you will have? Yes, no. 15. Are you conscious of being jealous of him, or her? Yes, no. 16. Is this person attractive to you not only in appearance but in the way he talks, acts, and thinks? Yes, no. 17. Do you approve generally of each other's friends? Yes, no. 18. Do you wonder if he, or she, is being sincere in what he tells you? Yes, no. 19. Do you have a wealth of things to discuss and do together? Yes, no. 20. When outside trouble develops for one of you, does the crisis tend to pull you together rather than apart? Yes, no. 21. Are there many things on which you disagree? Yes, no. 22. Do you find that in thinking of the future it is always in terms of two rather than of yourself alone? Yes, no. 23. Can you imagine how he or she will appear at 40 and still feel as deeply attached to him as before? Yes, no. 24. Do you have serious doubts about your love for him? Yes, no. If you have a perfect score, you answered every third question, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, with no, and all the others with yes. Did you have 20 or more correct answers? If so, we would judge you to be solidly in love. If you did not, you should be skeptical until you receive further proof. Chapter 5. Growing Up Sexually. Your ability to undertake marriage successfully has already been determined in large part before you even start. It has been determined by experiences you have had with sex generally and with the opposite sex particularly. Possibly you are already seriously handicapped by repressions and fears on the subject. To ignore or fear sex is no more sensible than to ignore any of the other emotions you possess. Sexual desire is a natural desire. Without it, your personality would become impoverished. Without it, there would be few marriages. Without it, there would be few children and few homes. Sex is nothing to be ashamed of or be whispered about. You can have love without sex and sex without love, but neither alone is very satisfying or enriching. For example, many men are capable of sexual activity with women for whom they could find no pleasure in social associations. Were it not for this fact, there would be no prostitution. Likewise, it is true there are many wives who love their husbands and engage in sexual activity with them, but without feeling any sexual urge whatsoever and without feeling any physical satisfaction. The ideal arrangement, however, is that in which the two people have genuine love and affection for each other and at the same time have strong sex desire for each other and find sexual satisfaction in each other. A very large proportion of the fears, repressions, and anxieties that people suffer from involve sex one way or another. Many of these repressions are revealed in such things as frigidity and impotence. The individual who is ashamed and afraid of sex will be repressed in married life unless the attitude is corrected, and will find it difficult to adjust to marriage. When such persons are married, the feelings of shame or guilt about sex may prevent sexual satisfaction. This lack of satisfaction, and the tension that goes with it, may produce nervousness, aches and pains, and even nervous breakdowns. Many married people, particularly wives, suffer from repression. While sexual maladjustment is not the only cause of unhappiness in marriage, it does play a significant part. It is estimated that 1/5 of all married people turn to masturbation as one of the ways to reduce the sexual tensions not satisfied through intimate relationships with the mate. How do these so-called repressions develop? Where do we learn about sex? Our sex experiences, whether good or bad, started when we were babies. We reacted in a very favorable way to the fondling, caressing, and other skin stimulation of our mothers. Love and affection came to be associated in our minds with fondling and stroking. Sometimes as the baby grows older, the parent lavishes too much affection on the child because the mother is hungry for affection which is not forthcoming from her husband. This excessive love conditioning may cause the child to become intensely attached to the mother and makes it difficult for the child to break away as it grows up. Not only this, but in addition, the excessive fondling and favorable attention may cause the child to have an excessive desire for sympathy and social approval. Ergo, we have a spoiled child. This spoiled child grows up feeling very sorry for himself and insecure when he is not receiving sympathy. In marriage, he or she becomes quite possessive because he or she wants to be the constant center of attention. But to get back to when you were a growing child. Many of the feelings of guilt, shame or fear that people suffer from concerning sex begin then. Perhaps the child is detected in the act of exploring his sex organs. It is probably normal curiosity, but the parents punish him so severely that the child feels exceedingly guilty about it. Perhaps the child hears a four-letter Anglo-Saxon word. Proud of this new acquisition, he comes home and uses it with his parents. The parents are dumbfounded, show their intense disapproval, and may wash the child's mouth out with soap. Or perhaps the child asks how babies are made, and the parent may rebuff the child or act so mysterious that the child concludes he has done something for which he should be ashamed. On the other hand, if as a child you had a confidential relationship with your parents and found that when you took such problems to them they would try to give you answers you could comprehend, you developed a normal, healthy attitude toward sex. Repression usually occurs only when something happens to us for which we feel ashamed or guilty or fearful. It would seem to us that no child should be permitted to reach the age of 5 or 6 without knowing where babies come from. It furthermore seems to us that no child should reach the age of 10 without knowing what produces or causes babies. Now we come to the period that affected you most profoundly in your sexual development, puberty. Can you remember how your life and body were changed from the time you were 12 to 14, that is, when you were first endowed with sexual capacity? Whether you were a boy or girl, your sex glands, gonads, began pouring their hormones into the bloodstream in great quantities. Perhaps you did not realize it at the time, but you began feeling more tense, more energetic, and began exhibiting what might be called animal spirits. Farmers shake their heads sadly at their youngsters during this period and resign themselves to the fact that the youths won't be over Fool's Hill until they are 16. It probably was during your early teens that you had your first great love affair, if you were normal. Puppy love is one of the sweetest loves that one ever has. It usually makes its appearance at about the time the girl begins to menstruate and the boy becomes capable of having sexual emissions. This first love of yours was romantic and idealistic. Probably you fell in love with a girl in the next aisle, passed notes to her and picked flowers on the way to school for her. You walked home together after school, and if you did manage to conquer your embarrassment and kiss, it is a kiss you will never forget. You did not realize that those hormones pulsing through your body were responsible for this crush, and did not realize why you were more tense and energetic. To reduce the tension, though, you looked at each other, and something about your past conditioning made each of you find something appealing in the other. Sometimes these first loves endure, but more likely you are soon both in love with new flames that suddenly appeared more appealing. Puppy love, you see, is an early version of infatuation. As a child your sexual feelings were diffused over the body surface, but with puberty those feelings came more and more to be localized in certain sensitive areas of the body, called erogenous zones, if you had normal contacts with the other sex. In the case of girls whose contact with sex is carefully guarded, however, it is quite possible that sex desire may remain diffused until marriage and the loss of virginity. The appearance of the menstrual discharge can be a profoundly frightening event for a girl unless she has been prepared to expect it. Often it marks the beginning of fears that carry over even into marriage. Take the case of Alice, a school superintendent's daughter, who was reared in a stern atmosphere of morality. When she asked where babies came from, her mother first rebuked her, and when she persisted in inquiring, the mother said they were brought in the medical bags of physicians. When she reached the age of menstruation, for which her mother had not prepared her, she thought a terrible calamity had befallen her. She naively believed for several months that she was having a baby. Later the only information she ever acquired on sex was through bull sessions with other girls at college, and there the information was misleading. She was fearful of sex, and when, during her freshman year, a boy tried to kiss her, she reacted very strongly. She felt that she must not be a nice girl or a boy would not think of trying to kiss her. Her mother had told her that nice girls did not kiss boys. Today Alice is 29 and still not married. Furthermore, she seems like a very poor prospect. She has reacted frigidly to all overtures of grown men to kiss her even though she feels she should marry. To her, sex is animal passion and its only rightful function is reproduction. She has so many repressions about sex that she cannot act normally in the presence of someone of the opposite sex. Here is how the repressions operate with Alice. She does her best not to think about sex. She avoids situations or circumstances that would involve sex by staying away from people of the opposite sex, by not going to dances and by refraining from doing things that would in any way bring sex to mind. Her life is a desperate hide-and-seek with sex. Furthermore, her repression is so effective that she won't even admit that a sexual problem exists for her. Sometimes direct fear conditioning may occur. In one girl who was referred to the Penn State Clinic, there was an intense fear of being with well-educated people. When all the facts were learned, it was discovered that in her early teens the girl had been detected masturbating by her mother. To frighten her out of the habit, the mother told her that such a practice would change her facial appearance so much that any educated person looking at her would know she was a masturbator. The girl, already ashamed of her habit, felt so much guilt that she started avoiding anyone who had a college education because she believed such people could see her secret in her face. It took many months of treatment to get her to the place where she could associate with college people with ease. It is our opinion that much of the sexual maladjustment of the world is brought about by parents giving their children the impression that sex is shameful, disgusting, fearful or nasty. One young man came into the psychological clinic complaining of severe indigestion, heartburn and excruciating stomach pains. When asked what he thought the trouble was, he said it probably was caused by his habit of drinking a couple of beers 3 or 4 times a week. He had made many efforts to stop drinking the beer, but in vain. The companionship of the other young men with whom he drank, the feeling of tension reduction that he felt while drinking, the partial release of some of his inhibitions under alcohol all prevented him from breaking the habit. He had never been drunk yet. He was sure that the half-dozen glasses of beer a week were causing his stomach trouble and would ultimately lead to ulcers or cancer. In working with this young man, it was found that he had begun masturbating in adolescence. His father had discovered this and had severely denounced him for the practice. The boy could not, or did not, give up masturbation and was in constant fear that he would go insane because his father told him that continued masturbation always led to insanity. In reading an old-fashioned book on sex which his father gave him, the boy ran across a statement to the effect that alcohol weakened the sex drive. He was so anxious to reduce his own drive, for fear of insanity, that he began drinking beer habitually. He was so sure the alcohol was reducing his sex drive that he stopped masturbating. Actually, of course, the sex drive was still present and his repression and anxiety were transferred from masturbating to beer drinking, with the physical symptoms already described. By helping the young man understand how he had become unfavorably conditioned to masturbation, which, while an inferior or substitute adjustment, is a natural act, he lost all of his stomach symptoms and gained a wholesome attitude about sex. How can sexual inhibitions and repressions be unlearned? The best thing to do, of course, is consult a good clinical psychologist or competent psychiatrist. Extensive psychotherapy may be needed. But here are some things that an individual can do that may help. Develop a friendly confidential relationship with some other person who can be trusted and bit by bit unburden yourself of your fears, anxieties, problems and frustrations. Simply getting things out of one's system brings tension release. Not only that, but as one talks about his problems and feelings toward them, he begins to define the problem and see possibilities of attacking and solving the problem himself. And the friend may have some helpful suggestions. Deliberately associate with people of the opposite sex as much as possible if repression is present. Gradually this will help reduce tensions as you become used to them, and if the conditioning is favorable you may achieve wholesome and normal reactions to the opposite sex. Acquire adequate information about sexual behavior. Good books are available today in the field of sex. Note bibliography in the back of this book. Even bull sessions can be helpful, though much of the information you will hear may be erroneous or inadequate. The freedom of expression in the sessions and the opportunity to talk help one feel less repressed and more natural when sexual matters come up. All young unmarried people should realize that the sexual emotion is just as much a hunger as a hunger for food, and that in marriage their personality is enriched when the sexual hunger is satisfied. While all this association with the opposite sex is going on, the girl or young man is learning what kind of a mate he wants in marriage. It is only through these experiences, starting with puppy love, that they begin to set standards and qualifications of the persons they would like to marry. The typical boy or girl needs to date a good many persons before they know the kind they would like to have as a mate, to decide upon the minimum standards they wish. In going with one girl, the boy learns to appreciate music and decides he wants a wife who can play the piano. In going with another girl, he finds he wants a girl who is brunette, who is reasonably tall, who is relatively slim. In going with a third girl, he discovers he wants a person who has as much education as he does and who is interested at least politely with mechanical things, which happen to be his passion. In going with still another girl, he discovers that it is important to him for her to have control of her temper, to be friendly to people, to be gracious in manner, to be kind and considerate. And so it goes. It is only through such experiences that a man gradually learns what he wants in a wife and what is important to him. In contrast, it is ignorance of what one wants that may prevent you from ever achieving a happy marriage. Not knowing what you want or need, you may marry the first person with whom you become infatuated. Today there are nearly 25,000 different occupations in the country. More people are completing high school and college than ever before in history. The radio and automobile have broadened man's horizon. Thus for the man today, a selection of a wife from among a half-dozen girls whom he has known would be a hazardous selection. As we have said before, he would need to know at least 25 eligible single girls, and date at least a dozen of them, before he could be fairly sure of finding one that would meet his wants and needs. Chapter 6. Sex Adventuring. In the course of looking over the field for mates, a large part of our young people become involved in bodily petting and complete intimacy. How widespread are such premarital sex relations? All the factual studies would indicate that there has been a steady increase. Dr. L. M. Terman, whose book Psychological Factors in Marital Happiness, published in 1938, reports a study he made of 792 couples, concludes. The trend toward premarital sex experience is proceeding with extraordinary rapidity. Of older couples who married around 1910, he found 50% of the men and 87% of the women had been virgins at the time of marriage. In contrast, of those who married about 10 years ago, only 14% of the men and 32% of the women were virgins at marriage. Dr. Terman predicted, if the drop should continue at the average rate shown, virginity at marriage will be close to the vanishing point for males marrying after 1955 and for girls marrying after 1960. It's a rare high school nowadays that doesn't have an occasional pregnant girl, unmarried, in its midst. In one city more than 200 such pregnancies occurred last year. Most of the sexual experiences today, especially for girls, are with people they eventually marry. But even in this respect, the trend indicates that more and more young people are having intercourse with persons they do not marry than has ever been true before in our history. The trend is more pronounced for men than it is for girls. This can be understood in view of the fact that it is the woman who gets pregnant, and not the man. Of couples marrying today, a relatively high percentage have complete physical intimacy before the wedding night. The rate seems to be higher among the lower economic classes than in the higher levels. This does not mean the morals of the upper classes are higher, but probably is due to the fact that girls in the upper group, who have lived at women's or other colleges, have more inhibitions. After marriage they often have greater trouble having climactic sexual experience than girls who only went to high school, because of these inhibitions. Probably less than 1/3 of such wives regularly experience orgasm. Why has premarital intimacy become more widespread in recent years? There appear to be several major explanations. The tensions of two wars and a major depression which led to postponement of marriage but not necessarily to postponement of gratification. Also during the war many girls threw their ideals to the wind in an attempt to find or give happiness on a friend's last furlough. Religion is not as much concerned with sexual taboos today as it was a generation ago. We have removed chaperonage and parents generally are more tolerant of their children's behavior and build in them fewer repressions than in past years. The widespread dissemination of birth control information and the improved techniques in preventing venereal disease have reduced the penalties of indulgence. Our people are more mobile today so that it is possible for a young couple to experiment sexually with less likelihood that their parents will find out about them. Boys have access to automobiles in which they can take girls to secluded spots. Hotels have relaxed their restrictions about verifying the Mr. and Mrs. of couples who register. Tourist camps rarely had any restrictions to start with. Finally, the war took millions of our young people away from their home communities. In short, the old controls of society have relaxed or are in the process of breaking down. The same is true in Great Britain, where studies during the war indicated that 1 out of every 3 births was conceived prior to marriage. While young men engage in intimacies because of the hormones pulsing through their bodies and because it makes them feel more grown up, girls engage for somewhat different reasons, though thrill is a factor. Girls in their teens do not have nearly as high a sex drive as boys of the same age. Whereas a man reaches the height of his sexual vigor at around 18, a girl does not reach hers until around 28. This is largely because of the different conditioning boys and girls get. Girls lead more sheltered, guarded lives and thus develop many more repressions and inhibitions about sex than men. Most girls who start to pet in their teens do so because they are afraid they won't be asked for dates if they don't pet. They give kisses as rewards to the boy for taking them to the dance. It is believed that at least one half of female sex delinquents get little or no pleasure from the sex activity. They indulge primarily to get something else they want, the prestige and pleasure of having dates. This behavior puts sex on a very low plane. The prostitute herself is rarely motivated by excessive sex feeling. Rather, she does it to obtain certain other things she considers important, such as spending money, gowns, cosmetics, etc. Some girls think that because of the surplus of women over men they must be aggressive if they are to get dates, and consider bold petting one of the most effective techniques of aggression. Actually, aggression of any kind usually has an adverse effect on a man, and the emotions generated in the girl by petting may lead to a sense of insecurity and a feeling of frustration. It would be pointless to advise that young people should never neck or pet, because the facts show that the vast majority of young people engage in necking and petting to some extent. But what can be said for and against unmarried couples practicing complete physical intimacy before marriage? What arguments have been advanced in favor of it? While young men engage in intimacies because of the hormones pulsing through their bodies and because it makes them feel more grown up, girls engage for somewhat different reasons, though thrill is a factor. Girls in their teens do not have nearly as high a sex drive as boys of the same age. Whereas a man reaches the height of his sexual vigor at around 18, a girl does not reach hers until around 28. This is largely because of the different conditioning boys and girls get. Girls lead more sheltered, guarded lives and thus develop many more repressions and inhibitions about sex than men. Most girls who start to pet in their teens do so because they are afraid they won't be asked for dates if they don't pet. They give kisses as rewards to the boy for taking them to the dance. It is believed that at least one half of female sex delinquents get little or no pleasure from the sex activity. They indulge primarily to get something else they want, the prestige and pleasure of having dates. This behavior puts sex on a very low plane. The prostitute herself is rarely motivated by excessive sex feeling. Rather, she does it to obtain certain other things she considers important, such as spending money, gowns, cosmetics, etc. Some girls think that because of the surplus of women over men they must be aggressive if they are to get dates, and consider bold petting one of the most effective techniques of aggression. Actually, aggression of any kind usually has an adverse effect on a man, and the emotions generated in the girl by petting may lead to a sense of insecurity and a feeling of frustration. It would be pointless to advise that young people should never neck or pet, because the facts show that the vast majority of young people engage in necking and petting to some extent. But what can be said for and against unmarried couples practicing complete physical intimacy before marriage? What arguments have been advanced in favor of it? First, we have heard it said that premarital sexual relations assist in the wise choice of a mate. You know what you are getting. You will know better whether you and the mate would be compatible sexually. One religious sect in this country takes a unique view on premarital experience. Couples do not marry until a child is conceived. In this way, the groom-to-be can rest assured his bride-to-be can bear him children. The trouble here is that many premarital sex experiences of the modern couple are engaged in under circumstances that are hardly favorable to the flowering of sexual desires and their satisfaction. When intimacy is accompanied by feelings of fear or guilt or shame, as is frequently the case in premarital affairs, permanent scars are left on the participants. Usually a person can get just as accurate a clue of what married love would be with a specific individual by petting and conversation rather than by complete intimacy with its usual aftermath of shame and guilt. Another argument often mentioned in favor of premarital sex relations is that it is dangerous to one's health to wait. This argument is based on the well-known fact that most young people are mature enough physically to marry several years before economic factors make marriage advisable. So why wither away while waiting? They point to the spinsters who shrivel up for lack of love. This is only a half-truth because, as you will see later in this chapter, there are other outlets for sexual feeling available in addition to coitus. These may not be as pleasurable, but they are virtually as effective. The withered spinsters are that way because they employ no outlets whatsoever. On the other side, the reasons why complete intimacy is ill-advised before marriage, we have first of all the fact that society frowns on such intimacy. Even though the practice is widespread, it is still illicit love, with all the psychological problems it involves. The idea that the bride and groom be virgins at the start of their marriage is the product of the experience of most civilized peoples. That in itself should mean something. Undisciplined sexual expression has always been found to be destructive to the social group that permits it to take place. Next, while it can be seriously debated whether complete intimacy hurts or helps an engaged couple planning early marriage, there is no question how it affects persons indulging on a casual basis. We have authoritative information on this point. In one carefully conducted research, the records of 25 girls were picked at random, girls who, according to their test scorings, were unconventional and generally unstable emotionally. These girls were carefully interviewed. Of the 25, 21 admitted to the counselors that they had been intimate with one or more men during the preceding 2 years. That is persuasive proof that promiscuous persons are usually also unstable emotionally. And being unstable emotionally, they are very poor prospects for marriage. Finally, here are some specific dangers that every person considering complete intimacy before marriage should be aware of. Possible pregnancy, and a forced and hasty marriage. If the child is aborted, the possibility of permanent sterility or other injury must not be forgotten. The probability that the illicit relationship may become known to members of your social group, if not to your parents. Probability that even though temporary relief from sexual tension is achieved, you may suffer from feelings of shame, guilt, or remorse. Possibility that your future spouse may discover that you have had sexual relations with another person. It may prey on his or her mind despite the fact that he goes through with the marriage. The possibility that the intimacy is practiced under conditions so nerve-wracking and undesirable that they cheapen the meaning of the act. The risk of venereal disease. The possibility, if you are a girl, that the relationship is exploitive. Perhaps the man is seeking his own satisfaction with little regard for the girl or her feelings. After those warnings regarding complete intimacy are given, we would like to make it clear that premarital kissing and petting do have a legitimate function. Recently a nurse trainee came to the Penn State Clinic. She was overwrought. She said her current boyfriend had laid his hand across her breast. Had she been prudish in becoming upset? She was assured that she hadn't been. But she was urged not to let the incident drive her to aloofness. Frigidness can wreck one's chances for a happy marriage just as surely as promiscuity. It is entirely natural for a mutually attracted young couple to desire to caress each other. It is one of nature's techniques for encouraging mating. Without it we would have fewer marriages, and children. It is harmful only when the attachment between the two people is completely sexual and they rush into an early marriage or into intercourse without marriage. Take for example Dorothy and Bob, who wanted some last-minute advice before marrying. Obviously they were crazy about each other. To them a kiss or embrace was a way to convey their adoration. Everything pointed to their being truly in love, and the tests showed them to be well matched. To deny them such expression of affection when together would not only frustrate their love but might even impair their adjustment in marriage. Their kind of innocent petting, however, should not be confused with the exploitive kind practiced by a student we'll call Hale. He said quite casually that he loves M and leaves M. Investigation showed that was precisely what he did. And while he was apparently not as irresistible as he implied, he did find some girls to join him in his sex adventuring. Some naively fell for his line. Others joined in quite frankly for the thrill involved in exploring each other. Both Hale and two of the promiscuous girls involved showed in their tests strong traces of emotional instability which would make them poor marriage prospects. Before a girl becomes involved in any petting, she should make sure in her own mind that it is not the exploitive kind. Caressing or petting becomes definitely dangerous when physical contact and stimulation become ends in themselves. In the case of an engaged couple in love, the intimacy is not just an end in itself but an expression of affection. The important thing is that sexual feeling should develop and grow out of the friendship and courtship of two people. It should not be the initial basis for it. There is likely to be exploitation involved if a couple feel impelled to engage in petting during the first few dates. Petting is progressive and can carry a couple much further than they intend to go. That is the big danger. Ideally, a couple should marry when their friendship and courtship have developed in them such strong sexual feelings toward each other that there is a physical and psychological need for satisfaction. This is why society is more tolerant of petting after a couple become engaged. It is nature's preparation for marriage. The trouble, of course, is in the serious lag involved between the time a couple may be ripe physically for marriage and the time they are prepared vocationally and emotionally to marry. We still have our child brides in backwoods areas, but most modern Americans do not consider it feasible to marry until they are well in their 20s. And in our civilization that is proper. But it does impose serious temptations on the people who have to wait. From the time they pass out of adolescence, young people, especially men, need outlets for the sexual tensions building up within them. There seems little doubt to us that refraining from any sort of sexual expression does impair one's psychological balance and mental health. Personality can be damaged and physical health may be damaged. But if we rule out climactic sexual relations with another person, what alternatives are left? There are three major forms this can take. Climaxes in the dream world. This is most common with men and produces their nocturnal emissions. Substitution. This usually means masturbation. Many people think that masturbation is a sin, that it will produce insanity, that it leads to skin blemishes or pimples, that it is something disgusting or filthy, that it stunts your growth. All the evidence indicates that none of these is true. A noted psychiatrist, O. Spurgeon English, recently said, "Most all psychiatrists, psychologists, and educators today regard masturbation as a normal phenomenon, indulged in to some degree by all human beings during the course of their development." As we see it, masturbation is a relatively harmless method of reducing tension, providing feelings of guilt and shame are not connected with it, and providing, of course, that it is not done excessively. Sublimation. You sublimate a sexual hunger, or handle it on a high, socially approved plane by such things as dancing and associating a great deal with persons of the other sex. A young person is greatly helped in this if he is permitted to date at an early age, 15 is not too young, and encouraged to bring his date to his home. Sublimation cannot reduce sexual hunger, but it helps to take your mind off it. If there is no outlet for these feelings through normal and natural associations with the opposite sex, and if parental instruction on sex has been inadequate, really abnormal sex behavior may result. The most common form of maldevelopment probably is homosexuality. It was once believed that homosexuals were born that way. But now it is known that the great majority of them, male and female, are normal in a bodily sense. Their abnormal behavior is clearly the result of unfortunate conditioning. Perhaps a boy was pampered too much as a child and has had little chance to mingle with the other sex, and then is rebuffed when he attempts to make dates because he seems namby-pamby or effeminate. While being forced away from associating with girls, the hormones are being poured into his bloodstream. The boy becomes tense without realizing why and without any outlet to reduce the tension. Bit by bit he may turn to persons of his own sex for sexual satisfaction, first perhaps through mutual masturbation and finally through homosexuality. It is known that there is much more homosexuality in girls' or boys' schools than there is at coeducational institutions. One study showed that 1/3 of married women have had at some time in their unmarried days intense emotional relations with other women, even though some did not recognize the behavior as sexual in character. There is every reason to believe that more women engage in homosexual behavior than is true of men. This is understandable in view of the fact that expressions of affection between women are much more acceptable than is true of expressions of affection between men. Nobody thinks anything of two women greeting each other with a kiss, walking hand in hand or with arms clasped about each other. Men would be looked upon suspiciously if they engaged in any such behavior. Still other abnormal outlets sexual feeling will take if it is not provided with normal or acceptable forms of expression are voyeurism, or peeping Tom behavior, brought about by curiosity about sexual behavior of other individuals because the person is repressed and lacks sexual information himself. Fetishism, which produces an unnatural sex attachment to objects rather than persons. The objects may be shoes, hair curls, wearing apparel. The possession and fondling of such articles create arousal and satisfaction of sex feelings. Pedophilia, or unnatural attachment for children, perhaps because it offers them a safe way to inspect and caress human anatomy. Sadism and masochism. The first feeling comes from inflicting pain on another, the second from having pain inflicted on oneself. This involves the sensual feeling of pleasure after pain which we have already mentioned. But to get back to the problem of finding socially approved outlets for sexual feeling before marriage. We would advise couples rigorously to refrain from direct sexual stimulation and other below-the-shoulder petting until marriage is fairly imminent if they hope to abstain from intercourse before marriage. The excitation of such petting is apt to swirl a couple into complete intimacy despite their best intentions not to go that far. We would not undertake to advise young people how far they should go in their petting, but feel that every young person, as a part of his or her personal philosophy of life, should decide just what his limits should be. When the limit is set, here are some hints on how to make it stick. Reserve even your goodnight kisses for people you are genuinely fond of. A girl should not cheapen them by letting a casual date lead her to the Davenport to collect a reward for taking her out. And don't fall into the error of thinking that free and easy petting will increase your popularity. It won't, except with people who would make unstable mates anyway. Limit carefully the time you are alone with a person of the other sex under romantic conditions. It is almost a rule of love that the longer a couple are alone with nothing much to do, the greater the likelihood they will pet. Several college girls tell us they never agree finally to a date until they are sure there will be something definite to do: go to the movies, dance, or play gin rummy. If parents or school authorities set a time limit for you to be home, they are really doing you a favor. Learn to sense when either is becoming physically aroused and stop. Again, college girls tell us that when they recognize the danger signals, they suggest to the man that they dance, go for a soda or take a walk. Learn that alcoholic beverages may relax your inhibitions to the point where you will go much further than you intended. That is why some people wisely refrain from drinking or limit themselves severely while on a date. Are you warm or cool by nature? Some people respond to their mates with a greater intensity of emotion than do others. This test should reveal your own responsiveness. 1. Were you reared in an affectionate family? Yes, no. 2. Do you become excited at a close football or baseball match? Yes, no. 3. Are you strongly moved by sentimental music or a romantic movie? Yes, no. 4. When friends are away a week, do you feel their absence a great deal? Yes, no. 5. Do you have a wide circle of acquaintances and friends? Yes, no. 6. Does it help you to take your troubles to friends? And do you want them to bring their troubles to you? Yes, no. 7. Are you fond of children? Yes, no. 8. Do you compliment others frequently and sincerely? Yes, no. 9. Does it distress you to see someone in pain? Yes, no. 10. Do you feel you are actively affectionate with the person of the opposite sex that you like best? Yes, no. 11. Do you feel you are free from repressions? Yes, no. 12. When your feelings are hurt, do you get over the hurt quickly? Yes, no. 13. Do you participate in 2 or 3 social organizations? Yes, no. 14. Do you find it easy to mix with casual acquaintances? Yes, no. 15. Associating with people of the opposite sex, are you open and natural rather than standoffish? Yes, no. 16. Do you consider yourself well-adjusted sexually? Yes, no. 17. Do you like to look after a sick person? Yes, no. 18. Were your own parents affectionate? Yes, no. If you answered yes to 15 or more of these, you are a warm, ardent person and should be able to work out a satisfying sexual adjustment in marriage. If you answered yes to 9 or less, you appear to be reserved and cool by nature. Your best chance in marriage will be with a person of similar disposition. Chapter 7. Do you frighten possible mates away? Getting along with the other sex is one of the most important skills you will ever learn, if you do learn it. If you fail to achieve a good adjustment, it will show up in other aspects of your life. Failure to get along with others is undoubtedly one of the biggest reasons why people fail at their jobs. Far more people are dropped from their positions or are passed over in awarding promotions because of personality inadequacies than are dropped because of technical incompetence. The person who can't get along well on a job is usually not a good risk in marriage. And the person who cannot get along with acquaintances is usually not a good risk for a job or for marriage. Likewise, when you find a happily married person, you will also usually find a person who is happy in his work and in his social contacts. And whether or not you get along with people, particularly of the other sex, depends primarily upon the sort of training you had in childhood. Professor Terman found that happily married people were people whose own parents had been happily married, were people who had a great deal of love and affection for their parents, were people who had been punished only mildly and infrequently by their parents and had been disciplined firmly but not harshly. It is not impossible to replace bad traits with good, but it will become increasingly difficult with each passing year. How do you impress people of the other sex? Did you ever stop to ask yourself that? To find the answer, you will have to adopt the attitude Socrates is alleged to have recommended: know thyself. Have you ever stopped to make an inventory of your assets and liabilities? Perhaps you have traits which you have lived with so long that you aren't aware of them, but which greatly annoy people you want to know better. Or perhaps the traits are not downright offensive but weaken your appeal. The test in this chapter, do you have a negative or positive personality, may help you in making an inventory. If you feel something is holding you back from popularity with the other sex, try to get to the root of your trouble. If people do not ask you out, why don't they? If some dislike or avoid you, what is the explanation? If some people seem merely to tolerate you, what is the trouble? If you feel you do not have as much influence in your group as you would like to, what is undermining your influence? Below we are going to point out a dozen of the major troublemaking characteristics. Perhaps some of them may apply to you. Do you feel uncomfortable in the presence of the opposite sex? Perhaps you are haunted by deep feelings of inferiority, feelings which may come from your lack of association, compared to other persons your own age, with the opposite sex, or perhaps you have been thrown into a more sophisticated group than you were accustomed to. Another possibility is that you lack the knowledge to intermingle suavely. Perhaps you still feel clumsy, and must watch your feet, while dancing. Perhaps you dread the ceremony of introducing people because you are vague on the etiquette involved. Perhaps you are not sure you are dressed appropriately for the occasion. Perhaps you don't know when to use the right fork or spoon. Perhaps you are not quite sure how to act in saying good night to a date, or how to thank a hostess for a delightful evening. The answer to this type of problem is simple. If you feel ill at ease because you feel you are a poor dancer, then learn to be a better dancer. Take lessons, or simply practice on your own living room floor. If it is etiquette that bothers you, read any of a dozen books on the subject, and watch carefully how others around you behave. One more thing, if you are haunted by feelings of inferiority, learn to do some one thing superlatively well, even if it is only table tennis or gin rummy. This will bring you recognition from the group and ease your feelings of self-consciousness. General Eisenhower has said that self-confidence is the greatest asset one can have in the world. John Powers, originator of the famed Powers Model Agency, tells his new models that the biggest thing they have to learn is self-assurance, and he quotes to them General Eisenhower's remark. Are you aloof? Many young people, after they have been bruised a couple of times in their early contacts with the opposite sex, wrap their ego up in a protective shell so that no one can hurt them again. Other people, particularly girls, want to be dated so badly and feel so anxious about not being dated more that they freeze when anyone approaches them for a date. They are anxious not to appear over-anxious, and again aloofness results. Finally, girls who teach often frighten men away through their aloofness. The teacher often carries into her dating, unconsciously, the reserve she develops in the classroom for disciplinary reasons. Whatever the source of the aloofness, the attitude is interpreted by the opposite sex as coldness and indifference. Possible dates are frightened away because you appear unapproachable and perhaps a bit haughty. Do you have a low boiling point, emotionally? Some of us have built up emotional habits that prevent us from getting along with persons of the opposite sex. We habitually lose our tempers, act rudely, show our anxieties, or go to pieces. They lead inevitably to quarrels with our boyfriends or girlfriends. If you are easily upset by frustrations or anger, you find yourself involved in temper outbursts and profanity, both of which are highly repelling to anyone in the opposite sex interested in you. Do you daydream frequently? The daydreaming itself does not annoy others, but daydreaming holds you back from appearing at your best. Daydreaming is usually simply the imaginary representation of satisfactions you do not achieve in real life. When you let your daydreams become a substitute for real achievement, your personality is definitely slipping and the outcome may be dangerous. If you must daydream, make it planful. Do you often complain about your health? It is bad enough for your marriage prospects to appear unhealthy. It is even worse if you complain of your aches and pains. You not only bring the other person's attention even more on your shortcomings, but reveal yourself to be something of a hypochondriac, who is defined in Webster's dictionary as a person suffering from a mental disorder characterized by morbid anxiety as to the patient's health. Do you blame your troubles and mistakes on others? This is one of the most vicious mental habits one can get into. Psychologists call it the habit of projection. You project your failures upon somebody else. The boy says he is not able to get along with girls because his father will not let him have the car. The girl blames her failure to have dates upon her mother for not giving her the right kind of clothes. Such a habit is much more serious than first appears. In the first place, one's listeners are not fooled by such projections, and in the second place the individual who gets into such a habit fails to profit by his mistakes. Thus he loses opportunity for making improvement. Are you intolerant of people who are not like you? Broad-mindedness or tolerance is a trait we must have if people are to like us. To be broad-minded or tolerant, you usually need to be both intelligent and well-informed. Intolerance and bigotry are either based on ignorance of other people or on a mind that knows the facts but is all twisted up. One should not confuse broad-mindedness with low standards and ideals. A broad-minded person may be tolerant of an individual whose own standards are low even though the broad-minded person tries to live by practical, realistic, and decent standards. You can be an unchanging believer in a particular religion or be an invariable follower of one political party, but at least you should keep from ramming your personal views down the throats of others. When you voice intolerances, you usually antagonize acquaintances who are startled by your narrow views. Are you argumentative? Many persons, because of their biases or prejudices or emotional tension, constantly want to argue. They hope by arguing to convince others of the correctness of their own views. The louder they shout, the more persuasive their argument, so they think. Actually, arguing rarely ever convinces anyone. And the one sure result is that it will create hard feelings, if engaged in vehemently. As long as a discussion can remain good-humored and considerate, with nobody raising his voice or becoming agitated, worthwhile ideas may be exchanged. Do you bore people by your talking? Do you chatter inanely or do you annoy people by constantly talking shop? One can talk about one's job without talking shop. The important difference is that he talks about those aspects of his occupation that will interest an outsider with normal curiosity. And he talks about his job only if the listener shows by smiling or nodding his head that the subject intrigues him. Being able to talk is not nearly so important as being able to talk in a congenial way. The congenial person sees that conversations cover only topics that are mutually interesting, and he avoids talking too much. Further, he is sensitive enough to catch the mood of the other person and is flexible enough to join in that mood. Finally, the congenial talker is sensitive enough to lead the conversation away from subjects that will only bring conflict. Are you self-centered? Perhaps you were spoiled as a child or are so richly endowed with physical charm or with talent you feel yourself to be the center of the universe. For example, the girl may have temper tantrums in public, she may humiliate her escort by biting sarcasm or devastating scorn. Often her escort simply serves as a foil for her brilliance or good looks. She frightens her man away because he sees himself going through life as a planet in her orbit. Such a girl is not seeking a husband as such, what she wants is a background for her own personality. After being hurt by her a few times, a man runs away and seeks a girl who will pour balm on his injured ego. Are you aggressive? A man may offend decent girls by being aggressively on the make. A girl may be aggressive by being a gold digger, and scare men away by being both expensive and inconsiderate. Or she may be aggressive simply in the sense that she is worried about the shortage of males and sets out grimly to get a man before it is too late. In matchmaking, man is jealously proud of his role of pursuer and does not want his traditional role usurped by the skirted sex. Thus most men resent overt signs of aggression by a girl. Are you repelling physically? Most girls like to have a man who is taller than they are. Feelings of prestige are involved. Poor health, extreme tallness or shortness, extreme obesity or thinness, very dark or very light complexion, poor motor coordination, seriously impaired vision, impaired hearing, unbecoming teeth, body odor, a general appearance of being weak and easily tired detract greatly from one's personality. Other things that detract are bizarre features such as tattoos, the appearance of being undersexed. In general, a person should never be more than 20% over or under the weight for his height. In these days of modern medical science, plastic surgery, orthodontistry, dermatology, etc., a girl or man can get rid of most irregular features. And those that can't be removed can be overshadowed. The physical paralysis of the late President Roosevelt did not influence people negatively because of the great personal charm of the man. The impairment of hearing of Thomas Edison did not diminish the respect and liking that people had for his genius. Odor is tremendously important in the impressions that one makes on others. It is believed that one of the reasons men like women and women like men is that their respective odors are agreeable to each other. Halitosis, perspiration odors, clothing odors resulting from wearing clothing in places of work where the air is redolent with manufacturing processes, may ruin your chances for marrying the one you want. Almost any girl or man who is in good health, who is willing to take care of his teeth, who avoids wearing clothing saturated with occupational odors and who is careful to avoid perspiration smells can be wholesome and fragrant. Perfume should be used to enhance the true natural body odor of the individual and not to mask unpleasant ones. Actually, physical appearances rarely need hurt seriously a person's chances of marriage providing they retain self-assurance. The trouble is that a person with a prominent nose or big feet is so concerned about the specific defects that he convinces himself he presents an ugly appearance. He develops feelings of inferiority, and that is where the real trouble begins. The person who holds his head up, who can look you straight in the eye, whose face is animated when he talks, is better looking and better liked than the individual who does not do these things. The restful physical position, the alert face and animated expression convey to others the feeling that you are poised. Poise and self-confidence make up a large part of good looks. Assuming that after reading this chapter you have concluded you have some bad habits that are hurting your chances of getting a desirable mate, how can the habit be broken? It is not easy. There are two major thoughts to keep in mind in trying to break a habit. First, once you decide to break the habit, you must not let any exception occur. The reforming drunkard who has trouble walking past bars knows that just one nip will set off a chain of violations. The longer he can keep from drinking, the weaker the urge to drink becomes, and soon he can pass bars without any trouble at all, and in fact with scorn. The second idea in breaking a habit is to substitute something in the habit's place. A person wants to stop eating sweets. Several years ago, one of the cigarette manufacturers sold millions of cigarettes by proposing that a person with a sweet tooth should reach for a cigarette instead of a sweet. This was the principle of substitution. A substitute for a boy who bites his fingernails may be something like this. He can reason. I have a desire to bite my nails, but I have a bigger desire not to bite my nails. While it is difficult not to bite my nails, it is much more important that my nails look acceptable if I am to get dates. I would rather have dates than bite my fingernails. Such a bigger goal may help you break any habit that offends people you want to impress. Girls probably are more concerned about the impression they create than men. Here is some advice to women that one investigator, a man, offered after making a study of the habits of women. Don't wear styles that men consider queer. Don't neglect the romantic illusion. Men are disillusioned by such things as hair curlers, awkward positions and postures, unattractive sounds in the throat, making up in public. Don't fail to answer a man, and promptly, when he addresses you. He may feel slighted by inattention. Don't nag a man. Men flee to office, club, other women, anywhere but where the nagger is. Don't tell off-color stories or use coarse language. Most men resent them in women. Don't show jealousy. All men abhor a jealous woman. Don't compare your male companion unfavorably with another man. Don't giggle, shriek or otherwise be loud to attract his attention. Chapter 8. Attracting the one you want. Will you marry the one person you have met whom you would like most to marry? Will you have to be content with a second choice, or will you have no choice at all? The answer will depend on how appealing a person you are. And frequently that appeal can be enhanced by knowledge of techniques for winning the romantic interest of persons of the other sex. The person who wants to win a mate must put 3 thoughts in the prospective mate's head. You must make that person feel the need of a mate, that you are the person who can best fit that need, and that the time is ripe for marriage. First, let's consider some of the things a girl can do to get a man thinking along those lines. She should talk about the man's basic needs in a subtle, impersonal way by discussing such things as good food, comfortable furniture, fireplaces, a place where one can bring friends. She gets his ideas on the style of home he likes, and gets his ideas about children. She does all this in a friendly, optimistic way and avoids discussing some of the disadvantages that marriage often entails. Veterans are particularly responsive to such an approach because their shifting, destructive life as fighting men has filled them with a profound desire to settle down to a comfortable, creative life. She appeals to the man's yearning for mastery, which every man has, by giving him the opportunity to do most of the talking. She follows his words with genuine interest and tries to fall in with whatever mood he is in. And she enthusiastically accepts his ideas about places to go on dates and things to do. Definitely, she minimizes any mistakes that he may make, blames him for nothing and keeps her complaints to herself, or lets them come out only as friendly, constructive suggestions. She makes herself physically appealing. She does not discuss any poor physical health she may have, nor does she discuss any bad breaks or her possible knack for always getting into trouble. She lets him get the impression that other men are interested in her, but makes it plain that they do not interest her nearly as much as this particular man. She does not run down other girls. She makes it clear that she is sure he must be popular, and very successful in his work. She talks casually about her married friends and gets across the idea that they are terribly glad they married. She strives to make every occasion with this man an enjoyable one. Finally, she is not afraid to let him know that she likes him and that his feelings toward her matter a great deal. In short, the girl constantly sets up conditioning situations which make the man feel good inside for having been with her. Soon he'll start thinking that it would be nice to have that good feeling inside for the rest of his life. That is the mood in which proposals germinate. What are some of the things a man can do to get a girl in a receptive mood for a proposal? Here are a few. If he is a shrewd, practical psychologist, he can detect the chief source of her feelings of inferiority. Most girls feel inferior about something, usually something about their appearance, since that looms so important to them. Perhaps they are acutely conscious of big hands or thick ankles or mouse-colored hair. In such cases, the man should reserve his most enthusiastic compliments for those sites of anxiety. He does not need to mention them specifically, but he should word the compliments in such a way that those features are obviously included in his admiration. The girl will be so grateful that she will want to be with the man as much as she can just to hear him say such nice things. The man should be romantic if it kills him. He should remember that women inherently are much more sentimental than men. If it weren't for feminine sentiment, there never would have been a Valentine's Day. The actual sex urge is not as strong in girls as it is in men, so they are much more interested in the forms of courting than in sex expression itself. They want to be told again and again that you adore them. The man, if he is adept, can play effectively on the girl's feeling of insecurity. Security is the most important thing in the world to women. Though girls can make their own living nowadays, most of them still feel their greatest chance for real security lies in marriage. How can the man play on these feelings of insecurity? By talking to the girl in detail about her job, about her aspirations, her plans for the future. He can accomplish the same result by the reverse technique of talking casually and impersonally about all the things that stand for security in a woman's mind. He can analyze house plans in a magazine with her. He can talk about his own future at his job and the prospects that someday he will have a job commanding respect and a substantial income. The man should be self-assured with the girl and just a bit masterful. Despite all the feminine emancipation of the past few decades, women admire he-men and sometimes yearn to be swooped up, whisked away, and relieved of all their problems. He should be considerate and gentle with the girl and be careful that he observes all the amenities of politeness. Women are more impressed by etiquette than men. He should be careful not to reveal any anxieties he has about his job or his future generally. He should let the idea seep out that he is now in a marriageable state of mind and that other girls seem interested in him. Girls have a more fiercely competitive spirit in their mate-seeking than men. For people who are still a little baffled about the whole business of courtship, we can pass on a tried-and-true formula for winning a mate. We have seen it work wonders in scores of cases. The amusing thing is that it was not designed for snaring mates but for snaring customers for American products such as refrigerators. It is sometimes called the IDA advertising formula, named from the first letters of the formula's 4 key words: attention, interest, desire, and action. To get a person to buy a refrigerator, you must first attract his attention, then generate an interest, instill a desire to own the refrigerator, and then give him the final prod that will impel him to go in and lay down his hard-earned money for the machine. When applied to your situation, it involves these 4 stages in winning a mate. First, the prospective mate's attention must be directed toward you. Upon noticing you, he must see something that will arouse his interest. Then he must be stimulated to have a desire to know you better. When desire is aroused sufficiently, action, agreement to marry, results. There are, of course, many approaches to attracting a person's attention. A man has more liberties here in making himself seen than a girl, but let's consider some of the socially approved approaches a girl can make. She can arrange for relatives, friends, and social and business acquaintances to introduce men to her. In this her role can appear passive. Or she can use the beware men are approach by attending parties, meetings, and community affairs which by their very nature bring her into contact with men. After winning the person's attention, whether you are a man or a girl, the best way to arouse his or her interest is through conversation, and not just any conversation. Here out of the whole universe is one person before you. What kind of person is he or she? What are his or her interests? Unharness your curiosity and ask friendly, tactful questions. And you should make it clear that you regard the person's answers as worthwhile. Emphasize the you with such questions as, "What do you think about?" or "Your idea is the most sensible I've heard yet." Whether you are male or female, learn to be a good listener, or rather a good interrogator. Lead the person into topics he or she seems to relish discussing, and if you see frowns or looks of discomfort, change the subject. Jim may be very much interested in photography. He will like you if you ask him questions about his photography, whether he develops his own pictures, the kind of camera he has, the unusual pictures he has taken. However, you must use insight. Nana may be an expert stenographer but may not be very proud of her vocation and so would be more appreciative of questions about her taste in clothes, about the different places she has lived, the books she has enjoyed reading, the movie stars she likes, the places she has visited. If you are a congenial conversationalist, you have undoubtedly gone a long ways toward arousing the interest of this person whose attention you have. Now if you are still interested, begin asking more personal questions about the person's background. Perhaps this does not come until after several dates. The aim is to arouse in this person a desire to know you still better. Tell him the things you admire in the opposite sex. Intimate that you are sure he must be very popular. By attributing such a personality to him, you create in him a desire to know you better. Once this desire is firmly created, a courtship has begun that may very well lead to the altar. What traits do people especially look for in mates? One study of college women and college men found these traits to be mentioned most often. Girls want in men, men want in girls. Congeniality, intelligence. Intelligence, beauty of form and figure. Companionship, congenial companionship. Handsome, form and features, neatness. Wit, appealing dress. Good nature, good sportsmanship. Neatness, modesty. Sincerity, good morals. Dependability, sincerity. Good sportsmanship, wit. Sex appeal, sense of humor. Flexibility, sex appeal. Good morals, honesty. Honesty, truthfulness. Good manners, friendliness. At Penn State, students were asked for the qualities they were looking for in their future mate and a quite different list resulted. They wanted their mate to have honesty, good health. Affection, love for children. Cleanliness, same religion. Sense of humor, neatness. Good background, have character. Still another survey shows that if mature men are asked what kind of woman they want for a wife, the majority will state that they want a girl who is dark, reasonably slender, intelligent, with a reasonably good figure, and is average to tall in height, and is affectionate in disposition. The emphasis here is on physical appearance. However, only 10% of the men insist that the girl must be pretty. Only about 15% insist that their wife be a blonde, despite the glamorizing of the blonde, and 33% of the men say that they do not want blondes under any circumstances. Even the plump girl has a chance. About 17% of the men want a wife who is plump to solid. Looks certainly are a factor in one's attractiveness to the opposite sex, particularly with girls. But actually almost any girl can appear attractive to men if she has only one or two really attractive features, providing she is intelligent enough to capitalize on them. She may be flat-chested or knock-kneed, but the men scarcely notice that because she designs herself so that her bad features are not seen. The eye is directed to the good features, whether they be lustrous hair or luminous eyes. Some of the most famous stars in Hollywood are either knock-kneed, thick-ankled, or big-footed. The only really ugly girls in this world are the freaks, the crude girls, the girls who appear sexless, and the girls who look unhealthy. Good-looking girls are the ones who make a good first impression, and have such attractive personalities that the impression persists. There you have an important distinction. Looks are important in attracting the possible mate's attention. There is a psychological factor involved. For reasons of prestige, a man usually wants to prove to his friends that he has picked a looker when he shows off his new girlfriend. But once the attention is secured, looks for either a man or girl become decidedly secondary considerations. From then on, a person stands or falls on his personality. A man can be an Adonis or a girl can be symmetrically perfect. Yet they can bore you and you can't get them out of your sight fast enough. What is the normal physical appearance of a man and woman? One physician has found that the average woman has a height of about 5 feet 4 inches and weighs approximately 132 pounds. For every inch of additional height she may add 5 pounds, for every inch less of height she should subtract 5. The man, on the other hand, has an average height of about 5 feet 7 inches, or 3 inches higher than the girl. He should weigh about 142 pounds. For every inch of height more or less, a man can add about 8 pounds, if he has his clothes on. Some women want their men to be tall, dark and handsome, but statistics would seem to indicate that only about 1 man in 200 attains the height of 6 feet. Sometimes young people develop terrible inferiority complexes because of specific ugly features they have. Since a feeling of confidence and poise is so important in winning a mate, it might be advisable for one with a bad nose, for example, to have a plastic surgery operation. As everyone knows, plastic surgery made tremendous strides in the recent war. A good plastic surgeon will remake your nose for a price averaging about $300. The operation itself requires less than an hour, and you may be out of circulation for only a couple of weeks. Such an operation leaves no scars because it is performed through the nostrils rather than from outside. Many other operations of this kind are possible, operations that will eliminate scars, that will improve a bad chin, that will give the lips a configuration, etc. The operation may be worthwhile if it is the only way to remove a source of anxiety. In these days of modern medical science, plastic surgery, orthodontistry, dermatology, etc., almost any person can rid himself of really abnormal features. And once you have achieved fairly harmonious features, your personality is what counts. It is significant that in defining a truly beautiful woman, John Powers, the model agent, listed these 4 things as being in the top 10 ingredients of beauty. A radiant personality. Integrity of character. Complete self-assurance. Intellectual curiosity. One Hollywood columnist wrote in his column the following 2 sentences that should cause anyone to think, beauty is a drug on the market. Personality can command any price. Complete self-assurance, tempered by modesty of course, is undoubtedly the most helpful characteristic anyone can have in competing for mates. The person who has an inferiority complex may have developed it because of physical features which prey on his mind, or because of some inadequate behavior in the past. He may have made poor grades in school or not have been able to earn a letter in athletics. There are many ways to acquire self-confidence. Here are some. Starting a savings account. Going to the right places. Participating in amateur shows. Dressing as well as you can. Owning a good collection of books or classical records. Joining a fraternity or fraternal organization. Taking part in church activities. Buying property or organizing a business. Becoming a scout leader. But one of the best of all possible ways to rid yourself of an inferiority complex and to develop self-confidence is to become skillful in social activities that young people frequently enter into. Learn to be expert at tennis or golf or ping pong or bridge or canoeing, or swimming or bowling or skeet shooting or gin rummy, or saxophone playing, or being an amateur magician. Nothing builds up confidence faster than to possess a secret skill that interests or amuses people of the opposite sex. Most important of all, learn to be a skillful dancer. If you can float about a dance floor, it instills confidence in you, and admiration in your dancing partner. Besides, you will enjoy yourself more. And a person who knows how to enjoy himself is attractive to other people. Chapter 9. Is the one you want the one you need? The average young person considering his or her prospects of marriage, we find, thinks only in terms of what he wants in a mate. But actually anyone facing realistically the problem of selecting a mate should realize that three things, not one, ought to be considered. 1. What you want. 2. What you need. 3. What you can get. Perhaps the ideal in your mind of the mate you want is not only something you can't get but also something you have no need for. What you want may be unattainable in the community in which you live. For example, if a girl would not marry a coal miner though she lived in a small coal mining community, she might either have to modify her standards, move to a different community, or become an old maid. Ordinarily you might think that the kind of mate you might want would be the kind you would need. But it often happens that a person's desires are based on frivolous or impractical considerations, or upon the desire merely to marry into money. During the past several years, students in Penn State psychology classes on preparation for marriage have been asked what amount of money they would consider an absolute minimum on which they would be willing to marry. The girls consistently specified more than the men. The average for the boys is $2,450, and for the girls $2,950. More than 10% of the girls have specified that they will not marry until their groom has an income of more than $5,000. Obviously such girls are insisting on incomes which are more than they need and almost certainly more than they can get. Take the case of Miriam, who specified that her man must be earning at least $4,000 a year before she will consider marrying. She set the figure that high because she says she knows nothing about cooking or managing a home, so will have to hire someone else to do that. This man she will be willing to marry must be of superior intelligence, even though her intelligence is barely average. He must be 6 feet tall, be dark and handsome, be a good dancer. He must have broad shoulders and a strong face. He must be a good Culbertson bridge player. He must smoke a pipe. He must come from a distinguished family and must be either a physician or lawyer. Finally, she wrote, he must be a man who will put her on an altar and worship her. Miriam has thought vaguely of children but thinks they should be put off for at least 5 years so that she may follow a dancing or theatrical career if something should develop. It is conceivable, of course, that she can find such a man, but considering her background and talents we doubt that she could interest him in marriage. Often what we want in a mate is based upon our wants at the moment rather than upon basic or long-range needs. A couple in their early 20s may insist that each be a good dancer as one of the main qualifications for marriage. They dance so much that dancing looms large in their life. But 10 years from now, when they will probably dance only a few times a year, it may be an unessential qualification, while the ability to manage finances may add to the total family income and help weather a serious depression. Qualities that may make a boy or girl a wonderful date are not necessarily the qualities that will make a wonderful mate. The two can be profoundly different. A girl wants a date for a party or dance. She wants a man who can dance, who will be admired as good-looking, who will be a good mixer, who may be a catch, perhaps a football star or a radio actor. While these may be qualities needed for a date or dance, they probably will not be important qualities she will need in a mate for happiness in marriage. Don't confuse a good date with a good mate, for what you want in a date may be far removed from what you need in marriage. Too many times people fall in love with glamorous traits in the other. A girl falls in love with Bill because she loves his flattery or his dancing or his car or his taste in clothes. They cast such a halo effect that the girl gives little thought to the fact that Bill is a chronic heavy drinker. If she could see that his drinking will probably wreck any marriage he undertakes, she could spare herself much heartache. Some people set their mate goals so high that they would rather remain unmarried than marry anyone below these standards. Years later they may be terribly disappointed and frustrated as a result. In the summer marriage classes at Penn State, which are largely made up of unmarried school teachers, many have confessed that they could have married when younger but somehow the man didn't seem quite good enough. Now, too old to hope to marry, most of them wish they had been more practical in their middle 20s and not have had to wait until the late 30s or feudal 40s to see their error. We know of young men today who would seem to be excellent prospects for mates, and they actually favor the idea of marrying, but we would be willing to predict that they will be bachelors. They are too fussy. They find something in every girl they go with that does not conform to their idea of an ideal mate. How do we come by our ideals for mates? During adolescence and childhood both boys and girls form in their mind some kind of a dream hero or heroine, a sort of phantom lover. He or she is a composite of all the qualifications they want their future mate to have. No such paragon ever exists in real life, and the mental image does undergo some modifications as the individual grows older. Often this ideal has the qualities of some of the people we idolized in earlier years. Sometimes the qualities seem to be those of a favorite movie star, or of a heroine of literature. Sometimes they are inspired by qualities of an admired parent or older brother or sister. If you were brought up in a home by an adored and deeply loved mother, your fantasy ideal may have almost all the good qualities of your mother. But if you were brought up in a home where you and your mother were in constant conflict, then you may be interested in avoiding in a mate all the qualities you associate in your mind with your own mother. People who cling to their fantasy ideal after they are grown up do so largely because they cannot distinguish between what they want and what they need. They are convinced that their wants and needs are identical. Their families and friends may try to show them the difference, but their immediate wants are all that they can see. Most of us who are married can look back and can see that the girl or man we yearned to marry at 20 would not be the kind of mate we need now. We thank heaven that we did not marry that one. Then what are the things we need in a mate? There are certain qualities that almost everyone would accept as desirable, qualities such as good health, sense of humor, fairness, dependability, unselfishness, patience. And there are some traits that are so fundamental that we will take them up in the next chapter under crucial traits for a happy marriage. However, most all authorities are agreed that in considering possible mates you should in general seek someone who is roughly near your own age, who has about the same education that you have, who comes from approximately the same social-economic level that you do, and who is of the same nationality, race and religion. Intelligence is important only in a relative sense, relative, that is, to you. Feeble-minded persons tend to marry feeble-minded persons. While geniuses cannot always marry geniuses, they do tend to marry highly intelligent people. The average man marries a woman who is slightly less intelligent than he is. That's why many brilliant women never marry. They do not come in contact with sufficiently brilliant men, or fail to disguise their brilliance in order to win a man of somewhat less intelligence. College males tell us that they want a girl for a wife who is intelligent, but makes them feel they are still more intelligent. Another thing we must concede, some people have wants which are so intense that they become needs. We have a letter from a veteran, a young major. The girl he has long considered proposing to has everything he wants except beauty. He has gone with her for 4 years. He is 31, she is 27. She is sweet, understanding, affectionate, is well educated and supporting herself. She is a good cook and an excellent companion. She is neat and clean and plain. But she is not pretty. He knows she loves him and he thinks he loves her, but every time he thinks of proposing he is held back because she isn't attractive. Perhaps he should not marry this girl if her lack of beauty is going to gnaw at him the rest of his life. One alternative, and we suggested it, was that he suggest to her somehow that she take a course with a charm school. Another thought we suggested was that most beauty comes from within and that 10 years from now this girl would probably have a more appealing face than many of the so-called beauties of her own age today. In considering what you need in a mate, it might be helpful to consider what are the important things to your happiness in life. A marriage will be good for you only if it helps you satisfy these basic needs. These needs, after you have achieved subsistence through food, shelter, and clothing, are primarily psychological. In considering whether any particular person would be a good mate for you, ask yourself these 7 questions, based on the psychological needs you will want to satisfy. Will this mate bring you social approval? You will want a mate that other people will like, that other people will admire and respect. You thus need a mate who is adept at getting along with other people. Will your friends like him and will the mate's friends like you? Will your parents think approvingly of the marriage? Can this mate offer you security? This desire for security is a very fundamental one, especially with girls. It is based upon the bodily need for food, shelter, and clothing, but is much more complex. Will this mate be kind and considerate and give you a feeling of confidence and stability? Will this mate refrain from gambling, drinking, and other things that might imperil the security of your future home and children? In short, will this mate bring you a feeling that you have an anchor that will keep you steady? Will this mate help you get ahead? This involves the desire for mastery, which is a universal human motive, particularly with men. It produces the urge to succeed, to excel, to overcome obstacles, to keep on fighting, to master situations. It is this desire for mastery that makes a husband take a correspondence course which may lead to a job promotion. The girl wants a mate who will be ambitious and the man needs a wife who will show initiative, who will read books on how to prepare tasty dishes and how to rear children according to the best principles of child care, and who will not become easily discouraged or frustrated. Chapter 10. Crucial Traits for a Happy Marriage. Thus far we have talked about what young people think they want in their mates and about the basic needs, which a good mate should fill. But we still haven't discussed the big question. What are the actual traits you should have and your mate should have if you are to achieve happiness in marriage? What makes a marriage happy or unhappy? A few years ago no reliable answer was available. But within the past few years a great deal of illuminating data has been turned up by investigators as a result of an upsurge of scientific interest in marriage. This interest was aroused by the frightening rise in marital bankruptcy as shown by the divorce trend. What are the characteristics actually found in happily married mates and unhappily married mates? Terman delved into the lives of 792 married couples and came out with these conclusions about the qualities that usually go with both kinds of mates. Happy wives, unhappy wives. Have kindly attitude toward. Others often have feelings of inferiority. Like to help underdogs, tend to be defensive or aggressive. Tend to be conventional, easily annoyed, irritated. Are cooperative, often join clubs only to get an office or recognition in them. Strong urge to save money, extreme in their views. Are optimistic about life, more likely to be neurotic. Do not take offense easily, lose tempers easily. Less interested in social activities such as dances, impressed by thrilling situations. Like to teach children, seek spectacular activities. Put less importance on clothes, want to be on the move. Are systematic homemakers, show little interest in housework. Do less daydreaming. Now how about the husbands? Here is what Terman found about them. Happy husbands, unhappy husbands. Have greater stability, often have feelings of inferiority. Are cooperative, compensate by browbeating. Wife and subordinates. Get along well with business. Associates dislike details. Are somewhat extroverted, more radical about sex morality. Are more conservative in attitudes, inclined to be moody. Willing to take initiative, are more argumentative. Take responsibility easily, like recreations that take them away from home. Do not get rattled easily, apt to be careless about money. Another approach Terman made was to find out what husbands and wives complain about most in their mates. He found that unhappily married couples were overflowing with complaints while happily married couples voiced few criticisms. Here are the complaints he heard most often. Complaints from husbands, complaints from wives. Wife's feelings hurt too easily, insufficient income from husband. Wife too critical in-laws. Trouble with in-laws, impatience of husband. Wife nervous or emotional, husband's poor management of income. Income managed poorly, his tendency to be critical. He has no freedom, his preferences in amusements. Wife has poor taste in amusements, his failure to talk things over. Wife is a nagger, his failure to show affection. When Terman had accumulated all of his findings, he devised a prediction of marriage happiness scale, by means of which an unmarried person could determine his own chances of finding happiness in marriage. This has nothing to do with the other person involved, but simply tests your own capability of becoming a good mate for someone. He found what we have already indicated, that your background largely predetermines your ability to be a successful mate. Of the factors he found most significant in predicting happiness in marriage, 10 stand out as most essential to success. 1. Are your parents happily married? 2. Did you have a happy childhood? 3. Were you free from conflict with your mother? 4. Was your childhood discipline firm but not harsh? 5. Did you have a strong attachment to your mother? 6. Did you have a strong attachment to your father? 7. Were you free from conflict with your father? 8. Were your parents frank with you about sex? 9. Were you punished infrequently and mildly? 10. Is your attitude towards sex free from disgust or aversion? Terman says that any person who has all 10 in his favor is a considerably better than average marriage risk. He gives emphasis to this by saying that any one of the 10 factors seems to be more important to marriage happiness than does virginity of the individual at the time of marriage. At Penn State, where the first all-college marriage counseling service in America was founded, an adaptation of Dr. Terman's prediction scale is used, by special permission of Dr. Terman, along with the Guilford Martin Personnel Inventory I and other tests. But the main device the Penn State Clinic uses in building an overall index of a person's prospects for a happy marriage is the Adams-Lepley Personal Audit, which was a product of Penn State's own investigations. This audit not only discloses your potentialities for being a good mate, and the potentialities of your possible mate, but goes on to match your two profiles to see if you are compatible. The happiest marriages, the clinic has found, are between persons who not only are good prospects for marriage individually but who have markedly similar personalities. The clinic calls this compatibility. It has found that opposites may attract each other, but it is the likes who achieve the happiest marriages together. In the process of perfecting this audit, the clinic not only tested it on thousands of persons and couples but followed up hundreds of those couples who later married, to find out how well the predictions bore up after the couple had been living with each other a year or so as man and wife. They bore up very well indeed. Now the clinic believes it knows just what traits are crucial for men to possess and what ones are crucial for women. They sometimes differ. The audit measures you for 9 separate and distinct traits of personality: sociability, conformity, tranquility, dependability, stability, idealism, steadiness, flexibility, and seriousness. A personality trait has 2 extremes, just as height has the 2 extremes of tallness and shortness. These are the opposite poles for the 9 traits just listed. Reserved, sociable, bold, fearful. Agreeable, nonconforming, broad-minded, idealistic. Tranquil, irritable, calm, emotional. Dependable, evasive, rigid, flexible. Thoughtful, frivolous. Let's consider these 9 traits, and their significance when found in a mate. You can also apply them to yourself. Trait I. Is he reserved or sociable? Another way to put it is this: is he introverted or extroverted? The reserved person is usually quiet, ambitious, serious, agreeable with intimates and confines his socializing to close friends. Sociable or extroverted people are extremely social and aggressive. They are talkative and carefree and sometimes show little regard for other people's rights. They are the glad-handers. Perhaps the man is a salesman, or the girl is a sorority president. The Penn State investigators found, surprisingly, that the happily married men tended to be just a bit more impulsive, to be more sociable, to be more talkative and to have broader interests than did unhappily married men. Women on the other hand could tend to be either reserved or sociable and still be happy, as long as they were not extreme introverts or extreme extroverts. Trait 2. Is he an agreeable sort, or is he an individualist? The agreeable person tends to conform to the norms set by society. He is usually poised, cooperative, can concentrate easily and tends to wholesome recreations. The individualist enjoys the idea of being different, is apt to hurt people's feelings by his brusqueness and impatience with things that bore or irritate him. In extreme cases he is bull-headed and argumentative. Trait 3. Is he tranquil or irritable? The tranquil person has an even disposition, works methodically, is patient, gets along well with folks. The irritable person tends to fly off the handle, to be easily annoyed, to find fault, to be erratic and peevish. For men, tranquility is a crucial trait, the Penn State investigators found. The happily married man is less easily annoyed, less irritable, less peevish, less critical than the unhappily married man. To a girl this means she should be careful about marrying a man who is irritable. While it is desirable for the girl to be even-tempered too, this trait is not as important for a girl as for a man. However, it was found that when one of the two mates tends to be irritable and annoyed, it is highly desirable for the other mate to be even-tempered. When you get two irritable persons under the same roof, the explosions soon force one to beat a retreat, sometimes into divorce. Trait 4. Is he frank or evasive? This is probably the most crucial trait for marriage happiness that we know. The dependable person is frank and truthful and conscientious. He gets along harmoniously with others, is willing to accept responsibility, is stable and cooperative. The evasive person is unwilling to face reality or to accept responsibilities. He passes the buck or projects the blame for things onto others. He exaggerates and often lies. He is easily depressed and lacks integrity. Persons who rate high in dependability consistently are the ones who are happiest in both marriage and their work. This one trait is at least as crucial to happiness in marriage for a girl as is the entire complex of traits measured by Terman's prediction scale. While it is most crucial for girls in marriage, it is also crucial for men. For a girl it is unquestionably the most crucial trait we know. This means that in considering any possible mate you should be particularly careful to notice whether he or she is dependable or not dependable. Does he keep appointments, tell the truth and work conscientiously? Trait V. Is he bold or fearful? The bold person is confident to the point of cocksureness. He is willing to carry out responsibilities, usually is carefree, stable, self-sufficient, and a bit dominant. The unstable, or fearful, person is shy and changeable. He may seem withdrawn and rarely evinces qualities of leadership. This trait is crucial for women and fairly important for men. A woman, to have a happy marriage, needs to show strong indications of stability, because in running her household alone she must be self-assured and independent in emergencies when outside help isn't available. A man should beware a woman who is exceedingly nervous or fearful, jittery, or afraid. For the man it is important that he be fairly stable, but without being reckless. Trait 6. Is he broad-minded or idealistic? The broad-minded person is tolerant, flexible, practical, realistic. His temperament tends to be pleasant and smooth. The idealistic person shows strong attitudes. Prejudice, often disguised as high standards, may be present. Inferiority and peevishness are often found here. Stop and think. The girl you want to marry is the one you hope will be the mother of your children. You want her to instill reasonably high standards and ideals in the children. You want her to be conventional and not do things that will bring criticism. The happiest marriages are those in which the wife has high standards and ideals but not ones that are so stiff and unyielding that she can never see any justification for a slip-up now and then. Unhappy marriages are those where the wives have standards that are very low and who behave in unconventional or questionable ways. Our society encourages higher standards and ideals for women than it does for men. The man can be tolerant and easygoing but should have standards sufficiently high so that he considers it important to be faithful to his wife, and does not waste his money in drink or gambling. Trait 7. Is he calm or emotional? Calm persons have normal ways of thinking. Their feelings are not intense. Persons whose work requires objectivity and courage, such as surgeons and military leaders, score high at this level. Emotional people, in contrast, usually think in unorthodox ways. They are usually sensitive. Their feelings are volatile and deep-seated. Interests in writing, drama, arts, literature are often found here. Individualistic, creative work is preferred, and the person may appear temperamental or eccentric to others. Repression and sexual conflicts are common. Since the emotional person is intense and usually not too well adjusted, marriage may not prove too satisfactory. The trait of coolness or steadiness is much more crucial for men than for women. The happiest married men seem to be those who are steady and free of excess emotion. This enables them to be objective in their work. A girl should be wary of selecting a mate who is very emotional, who is too much interested in sex, or who works in the movies or other work where there is a great deal of glamour and excitement. Trait 8. Is he rigid or flexible? This is more important in men than in women, and the man's age determines whether he should score high in rigidity or in flexibility. If the man is under 25, it is well for the couple's future happiness if he scores quite high in flexibility, because marriage requires a great deal of adjusting, and a certain amount of trying out new jobs is healthy for a young man. However, flexibility in a man past 30 should make a girl seriously question the advisability of marriage to him, because he is apt to be permanently a will-o'-the-wisp. His characteristics are pretty well set. A man in his 30s who changes jobs frequently, who is not settled, is not a good matrimonial bet. Trait 9. Is he thoughtful or frivolous? Beware of the girl who is frivolous. She will be shallow and discontented, she will have many unsettled problems, she will be worrying about her past as well as her future, she will have trouble making up her mind and will seem to be at loose ends. She may nag and complain. For women, thoughtfulness ranks second only to dependability in importance to marriage happiness. There you have the 9 traits. As you have probably noticed, it is much more crucial for women to have the right personality traits than for men. This is due largely to the fact that marriage looms much larger in a woman's life than it does in a man's. A wife has to do the larger part of the adjusting to marriage. She usually has to give up her name, her job, her residence, and many of her friends. The man can go on pretty much the same as he did before marriage. The wife must spend the greatest part of her day being a wife, homemaker, whereas the man serves actively in the role of husband only a few hours a day. In summing up, what advice would we give the young man in order that he can select a mate who will be happy in marriage and contribute to his happiness in marriage? Ideally, he might well look for a girl who is frank and dependable, whose family background has been such that she was reared in a happy home, who is thoughtful and not beset by conflicts revolving around her adjustments to the opposite sex, who is stable and self-sufficient and free from neuroticism, who is objective and free from excessive sensitiveness, who is friendly, kindly and considerate, who is cooperative in her relations with others, who is flexible and adaptable, who is steady and free from emotional behavior, who is tranquil and not easily irritated, who has average to high standards and ideals, who can be influenced by people who have sound ideas, who is somewhat extroverted and carefree. All of these traits of course are not vital, but it is advisable that she fit into the general pattern outlined above. Next, what should a girl look for in a young man? Ideally, he should be a man who is tranquil and not easily irritated, who is dependable and frank, who is objective and has feelings that are not easily hurt, who gets along easily with others, who is cooperative in group projects and likes to help people, who is cool and free from emotionality, who is concerned about what other people think of him, who was reared in a happy home, who is free of cares and has broad interests, who is fairly well contented with his lot in life, who can be influenced by others when their reasoning is sound. The big question is how you can know if you and any prospective mate have qualities that make you good marriage risks. You will find in the next chapter 10 tests that should provide the answer. They will record your rating on the 9 traits we have just discussed, plus a rating on your family background.